Our story begins with important things happening in a high castle. The people humbly awaited His Majesty's decision. Emperor Michael looked into the eyes of the man who had been sentenced and ordered him to pray. He didn't understand what was being discussed and asked again. Horror and fear were visible on his face. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what His Majesty's verdict would be. The emperor ordered an investigation into Duke Liscarella. While she was rereading the papers, His Majesty looked at her without stopping. She understood that she had a lot of things to do ahead of her, so she needed to make a good schedule. Finally, he made a decision. It was necessary to reorganize the Navy. What they heard greatly surprised everyone present. No one expected such a verdict. In the event of a military conflict with the Kingdom of Tatum, the Empire will be ready to fight back. The townspeople began to talk excitedly, discussing the situation. They wanted at least one piece of good news. At least today the council passed without an execution. Last time when people saw the chancellor's head cut off for discontent, they began to behave more cautiously. In fact, if it weren't for this secretary, the empire would have fallen long ago. But many still didn't understand what all the power was based on. No one understood how a man of humble origin could make the most important decisions, from the execution of nobles to the affairs of the imperial family. Perhaps the whole point is that the emperor himself could not utter a word. Suddenly, a third guy intervened in the conversation of the two guys. He told them to speak more quietly or not to discuss such things at all. There were too many strangers' ears around, and this could lead to trouble. There are various rumors, especially in high society. For example, they say that this girl is the only person in the entire empire who understands His Majesty. She has been in her position for too long. She has been in office for 10 years now, and may not even realize how much power she wields. Meanwhile, our heroine looked too tired. Obviously, the constant overtime had left its mark. The assistant asked if the girl wanted to rest, and in the meantime handed the papers to His Majesty. But she knew that if she didn't keep track of everything herself, the work would be done poorly. She couldn't sit back and do nothing. The assistant said that he had heard that the girl had been accompanying His Majesty for 10 years and wanted to express his respect to her. But she asked him to talk less and work more. He had to deal with important papers. The guy nodded and said that he would leave them in His Majesty's office. The girl was glad. Walking along the corridor, she finally enjoyed the silence. Suddenly, while she was looking for it, someone intercepted her. It was the emperor himself. She didn't understand why he took her hand, but the feeling of fear was too strong. He looked at her, but said nothing. The girl was waiting for at least some words. However, he only smiled silently, as if he had decided something for himself. Then suddenly he said, of course. What exactly he meant was unclear, but she replied that he shouldn't worry if she had had a good rest. She also added that she brought papers for consideration and compiled a list of official representatives. Adriana was amazed that such a young man with a pretty face was feared not only by the entire empire, but also by the entire continent. He was a huge threat to everyone. When he ascended the throne, his reign began with bloodshed. The imperial palace was tarnished, and countless nobles were executed. He was called a bloody tyrant. He was ready to do anything to achieve his goal, the most cruel ruler in the history of the empire. Adriana's heart broke every time she had to pronounce someone's sentence, but she couldn't help it. That was her job. However, she hoped that it would all end soon. Finally, the girl decided to speak. She turned to him, and he looked at her with a cold gaze. She had wanted to say this for a long time, and finally decided to do so. Adriana announced that she intended to resign this year. She apologized for the sudden announcement, but could no longer work there. The emperor looked surprised. She also added that it was necessary to start looking for a suitable candidate to replace her as soon as possible, otherwise state affairs would be at risk. Suddenly, he hugged her tightly, pressing her to himself. She didn't understand what was happening. She was scared, confused, and what's more, very embarrassed. Then the emperor said no, even insistently asked her not to leave him. These were the first words he spoke confidently and clearly. She did not understand what it meant. He addressed her by name again, but he didn't have time to say more because the girl suddenly lost consciousness. She felt very ill. He didn't know what to do, but that wasn't the main problem. What was worse was that the girl didn't realize when the emperor himself began to speak. Finally, Adriana woke up. She felt much better. She suddenly sat up, abruptly remembering everything that had happened the day before. Looking around, she saw His Majesty nearby. He was sitting next to her and was clearly worried about her condition. She tried to find out where he was, but the guy remained silent. He leaned closer. His face was next to hers. It seemed the girl had a fever. She couldn't explain what was happening any other way, but if she checked herself, she would understand that everything was fine. Suddenly, the guy turned around and headed for the exit. She tried to call out to him, but he didn't answer. Just before leaving the room, he said that they would discuss everything later. The girl was left alone. She didn't know what to do, what to say. It seemed like the situation was completely out of control. She looked out the window, not understanding what to do now. She didn't realize at what point everything went wrong. After all, if she hadn't knocked on Mikhail's door, then she might not have ended up here in this beautiful place. And it all started a long time ago, 11 years ago. At that time, she was still a child, a commoner, and lived in a small house. She was a good housewife, so she cooked soup for her parents early in the morning. They worked hard and often did not get enough sleep. To make their work easier, she took care of them. Her parents appreciated her care. Her brother loved cabbage soup, but she only wished him bon appetit. The father asked how the grandmother was feeling. The girl replied that she had already brought her food to her room. The mother asked if she would leave soon. The girl replied that she was already getting ready. She wished her parents a good day, and they said goodbye to her with smiles. At the market, the vendor immediately greeted Adriana. It seemed like everyone in the locals knew her. Two other traders asked her if she was going to the mountains again. The girl confirmed that she was. They asked if she was looking for the very medicine for her grandmother that she went to the mountains for every morning. Adriana replied that it was nothing because only she could help her family. One of the women admitted that she envied her parents. Such a wonderful daughter. She couldn't say the same about her own. The girl wanted to collect as many medicinal herbs as possible. If she could do this, the family would be happy. With this thought, she went further higher and higher into the mountains. A heavy downpour began, but she continued searching. It was cold. The cold was chilling her to the bone. Her hands were frozen solid, and there was no way to warm them up. She hadn't expected the day to be so harsh, and it was too early to go home. Sad, she found only 3 blades of grass. Her parents will be disappointed. She had to hurry and find more herbs, because everything had to work out for her. She concentrated with all her might, knowing that her parents were having a hard time too. If she doesn't find a cure, things will get really bad. But unfortunately, she couldn't find anything. She brought only 3 blades of grass that she managed to find and apologized for it. Her mother did not scold her, realizing that it was not her fault, and asked her not to apologize. But Adriana didn't know what to do next. Her grandmother's fate was in question, and it was up to her to save her. These herbs were not enough for medicine, so they would have to call a doctor. What was even worse was that there was very little money for a doctor, and this made the girl even more disappointed in herself. Suddenly, she heard something strange in the forest and became very scared. She knew that there were bears in the mountains, but they had never come down into the forest before. A hunter told about this when he found a huge deer carcass with lacerated wounds. This fact scared her, but she was not going to climb high into the mountains, so she decided that there was nothing to be afraid of. Suddenly, something jumped out at her. She prepared herself for the worst, but saw something very strange. She was scared, but even more surprised. A small boy in expensive clothes stood among the bushes. She didn't understand how he got there. She tried to ask who he was, but he didn't answer. She wanted to know about his parents, but again received no answer. He didn't answer any of her questions. and Adriana was confused. She thought the boy might be deaf. Meanwhile, he stood motionless, not knowing what to do. Then the girl tried to explain with gestures that it was dangerous here and that it would be better for him to leave. She didn't know how to find a common language with him. She didn't understand why the child was in the mountains, but his clothes looked expensive, and he was probably from a wealthy family. She asked if he was in a hurry to get home, and if his family knew where he was. She collected only 5 blades of grass, but she understood that she had to help the boy get out of here. Her parents would surely understand her. After all, they always taught us to help those in trouble. She decided that tomorrow she would gather more herbs, but now they had to leave. She told the boy that it was dangerous here and that they would go home. The guy still remained silent, and then the girl simply took him by the hand and led him along. The situation worsened. The rain began to intensify, and they needed to hurry. Suddenly, she slipped and hit herself hard. The basket slipped from her hands, and the herbs became wet, making them unusable as medicine. Adriana felt disappointed in herself, realizing how much she had let her family down. The herbs were crushed, and now the grandmother could have gotten even worse. She couldn't hold back her tears, but suddenly the boy wiped them away with his palm. She didn't understand what was happening, but the boy never said a word. He understood that the situation was extremely difficult, so he lowered his head and simply silently watched her tears. It looked so cute and even a little funny that it unexpectedly lifted her spirits. She took him by the hands, thanked him, and encouraged, decided to move on. Now she had to concentrate and find her way back, and the boy was just standing behind her. They had fallen from a high mountain, and now it was unclear how to return. Perhaps it was worth trying to climb higher. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand and quietly asked her to be careful. She was surprised because he spoke, although he had not said a word before. The next moment, a huge pile of stones fell on the place where the girl had just stood, which could have crushed her. She was frozen with horror, realizing that she had almost died. In a fit of emotion, she hugged the boy, who had just saved her, and then began to thank him profusely. The guy said he didn't know where the basket was, but now he was more concerned about its condition. She asked his name, and then told him hers, Adriana. But the boy remained silent, as if he could not bring himself to speak. Then she said that he did not have to say anything if he did not want to. However, after a moment, he began to slowly pronounce the words. Suddenly, he uttered one word, dangerous. She did not understand what he was talking about because there was nothing suspicious around. Suddenly, the boy hugged her tightly. It seemed like he just needed a hug. As they stood there, she felt him shivering. He was probably very wet and cold. She asked him if he was cold. Then she took off her cloak and carefully threw it over him. Suddenly, he said, Zarper. This surprised her. She knew that the word meant a breed of dog, but she did not understand why he said it. However, the boy did not hurry to wrap himself in the cloak alone, but began to take it off. Adriana did not understand why he was doing this, and asked him to put it back on. But instead, he threw the cloak not only over himself, but over her as well, so that they could keep warm together. They sat down and began to think about what to do next. Surrounded by a gloomy forest, Adriana thought the boy was very smart and kind. Suddenly, he answered her. It seemed for the first time. Perhaps no one had called him that before. The girl understood his feelings, but could not explain why she herself had such a strong feeling of longing. Suddenly, she noticed something and became very scared. However, then she remembered that she had once seen someone very similar to him. She remembered an argument with her brother. He was very angry about the soup, calling it bland mush. The boy suddenly took the bread away from her, saying that she should eat the soup herself, and in the meantime, he would eat the bread. It was her bread and butter, but he didn't care. He said he was going to school, so she shouldn't bother him. Although she hadn't had much breakfast, it didn't seem to bother him. Suddenly, her grandmother called her. She was very scared, so she went to her grandmother and asked what happened. She replied that it would rain soon. Adriana said that she understood everything and decided to close the window so that nothing would get wet. But suddenly, her grandmother started yelling at her. She complained of severe pain in her joints, and Adriana didn't understand what exactly had happened. The woman did not understand why she was still alive. She had long wanted to rest in a cemetery because now she seemed like a burden to herself. No one could take care of her sore joints. As soon as Adriana heard this, she immediately rushed to her grandmother and began to massage her. Although the guy reminded the lady of her relatives, he was completely different. He was not rude to her. So small and kind, he must have been good to her. Suddenly, they woke up from a noise. Someone was walking in the forest and loudly calling for Mikhail. She asked if he had run away from home, but the boy remained silent. Adriana couldn't understand why he decided to leave his family. They called him Lord, which meant he was from a noble family. Then she asked him directly if he was a nobleman. He quietly answered, yes. Suddenly, she started calling for rescuers, screaming that they were here. She smiled at him and said that it was time to go home now. She also asked him not to do that again, because his parents were very worried. Adriana watched as everyone fussed around the young gentleman, but then an officer turned to her. He asked her name, and the girl introduced herself as Adriana Woods. The man said that she saved the young master and expressed his gratitude. She wanted to say goodbye to the boy, but she understood that they would hardly let her. Surprisingly, in a short time, many people gathered to bring him home. They all surrounded the boy, protecting and caring for him. Adriana was upset by this. There was so much care around one child, and her own family didn't even remember her. Suddenly, Mikhail appeared in front of her. He looked pleased. He handed her something and said the word grave. The girl was surprised, not understanding what he meant. The boy looked upset. He was not understood. Adriana asked again. Maybe he wants it buried in the ground. The knights asked him to return home, but he remained silent. As he got into the carriage, Mikhail turned around and smiled as if saying goodbye. Adriana waved after him, hoping that everything would be okay with him. She hoped that her parents would be very happy when they found out that she was okay, and that she would be able to sell the little thing her boyfriend gave her for a lot of money. But it seems that she is very dear to him, so she will not tell anyone and will just go home, because most likely her parents were very worried. She didn't know if they would see each other again. In the following days, she also said goodbye to her parents. They said that most likely they would come much later. Today they also asked for her grandmother's assistance. Adriana said that she would do everything and wished them a good day. At that time, she was 14 years old, and her grandmother was still sick, and her brother was still preparing for exams. Her parents still leave her to do all the housework. She can't seem to get out of this routine point. Every day the same thing happens. What happened was ingeniously last year. She always kept this dear, I ask, with her, and she needed to climb the mountains as soon as possible. And the same brooch reminded her of the meeting with the guy, and that it was real. After a long routine work in the forest, she finally finished and could return home. Suddenly, it started raining again. She was merciless because she didn't expect it to rain here either, and she needed to get home quickly. The lightning was very close, so she moved very fast. It was impossible to see anything through the rain, and suddenly lightning struck even closer. The girl was so scared that she even lost her brooch. She picked it up and decided to gather her courage and pull herself together. As soon as she wanted to touch this thing, lightning struck very hard. It seems her hand was injured. I was left with nothing but a lying cake from more. It seems like she's about to die because she's very badly burned. She didn't understand whether she was sleeping or already dying because there was no village at all. Maybe she really is dying. But suddenly she realized that she had been dead for a long time. After all, it was the story of the novel she was reading, namely about Adriana Woods, who was the deceased sister of a corrupt nobleman. The family used her even when she was an adult, and eventually she died. She understood that she was now in this body, but she did not want to come to terms with it. She hoped that it was all not true. No matter how much she hoped that it was just a dream, the feeling of bitterness and resentment permeated her very strongly. She didn't want to die, and she made a vow to herself that she wouldn't die, and even though she was forced to indulge her family, she would never die. Meanwhile, she was getting ready to go home. His colleagues did not understand why he was leaving so quickly from here, because his sister works very hard every day, and they asked why he did not help her. But in life he said that he did not need this. Then soon at the academy, while she was getting water from the well dirty and very tired, her brother hit her and told her to move away. She replied that she needed to wash it off because she had fallen down a hill. Then he asked why she didn't cut her long hair since she didn't need it at all. He also added that I wasn't very good today, so he wanted something better for dinner. Suddenly she decided not to indulge him and said that she could not cook something new. And I asked her again if she was sure of what she was saying. And with a look, she answered him that she would not do that. The girl replied that she couldn't do that at all and put the bucket down. She said that she was very tired and she felt very bad, so she would go to bed. I was surprised because she was not going to cook anything because she was tired and did not understand what they would eat. It seems he is not at all interested in what condition his sister is in, and so on. The girl replied that he should prepare dinner for the family himself. This surprised him so much that he asked if she had gone crazy or if the girl had gone crazy because he never expected such a reaction. The girl replied that she hoped that they would never set up an exam like that because civil servants from him are not at all smart. Most likely he would just be a social parasite. The girl was very angry with him. She understood that he had been using her all this time. Suddenly, she decided that her brother could get some water himself, so she plunged her head into it. I didn't understand what she was doing. The girl smiled and asked if he needed more water. He was very surprised by such a question. It seemed to him that his sister had gone off the rails. It seemed to him that she was completely abnormal. He didn't understand how she dared. And he also threatened to tell her parents everything. But she didn't answer him. She just looked into the distance and sat there like that until the evening. When she came home, her devastated father asked Adriana what happened. The girl let her parents into her room and asked what happened. They learned that Adriana had been acting inappropriately with her grandmother, and she had also acted the same way with her brother. They asked Adriana what was happening to her because you can't treat your family like that. The girl apologized. The father replied that she probably does not understand because we have a lot, but in adult life, she will have a lot of difficulties. So sooner or later, each of you faces a difficult period. But one day everything will fall into place. He stroked the girl on the head and said that everyone has the right to make a mistake, so they forgive her for this and leave her without punishment if she goes to apologize to her brother and grandmother. Suddenly, she replied that she was very tired. The father did not understand what she said and asked again what she meant. And she started yelling at everyone that she was very tired. It was clear that this situation made me very angry. She burst into tears even more and said that the light does not rise before dawn and puts things in order, which is breakfast, while they are not sleeping. This answer greatly surprised the parents. The girl continued to the authorities to spend in the mountains in search of medicine for her grandmother. And when she comes home, an ungrateful grandmother and brother are waiting for me. My mother could not listen to this any longer, so she hugged her daughter, realizing how hard it was for me. She said that she was very sorry that everything was happening this way. At that moment, the main character realized that her parents could understand her. At least her mother for sure. The girl wiped away her tears and said that everything was fine. And her mother said that she was very glad to hear this. Well, after these warm words, I asked her to apologize to her brother. This destroyed her even more. Inside, it shocked her so much that she immediately changed her expression. Mom asked because of what was left for us. Mom added that she thought that she had at least grown up a little and changed, but she was very wrong. Dad said that he had said so and that everything would be like this. Her father ordered her to immediately apologize to her family, especially her brother. The main character stood there in tears. I don't know what I'm doing, but my father added that she's not a child at all, and life is not as simple as she thinks. Adriana suddenly remembered how her mother loved to tell her friends how good her daughter was. At the time it seemed like a sign of pride, but now it became clear that it was all an insincere game, a way to control and suppress. She did not obey. Realizing that she did not have to endure everything, she decided to make it clear. Let her brother at least once experience what she was going through, and she herself would study, despite anyone's threats and protests. This answer caused a storm. The parents became even more angry, accusing Adriana of rudeness. It seemed to them that she had violated the established order, encroached on their authority, and forgotten about the upbringing, which, as they thought, was sufficient. The conversation turned into a real fight. Holding back her rage, the girl asked, "Will there be at least one decision made for her sake in this house?" The words were full of pain, but they reflected everything she had long felt inside. The father looked at her with surprise and irritation. He said that he did not recognize his own daughter, did not understand where she got all this from, and then he announced a punishment, not wanting to figure it out. Then Adriana asked about the medicine. After all, every time she climbed the mountains, collected rare herbs, and brought them back with a reserve. But no matter how much she brought, it was never enough. She tried to help to make someone's life easier, but in the end, she received only discontent and reproaches. She couldn't stand it, and asked why all this happened, then why they lied to her. But her father didn't listen to her. He just hit her in the face. Adriana continued, "Why herbs, if you don't need to go to the mountains anymore, if they are not needed?" The father didn't even understand what she was talking about. He asked her in a rage if she was in her right mind. It seemed to him that his daughter was talking nonsense that he didn't even try to comprehend. It wasn't the content that angered him, but the tone itself. Adriana calmly said that she knew what she was saying and was careful with her words. But this only made her father even angrier. He wanted to hit her again because he thought she was messing with his head with unnecessary nonsense. His mother stopped him. He could hardly contain his anger. He screamed that Adriana would be punished and would remain under this punishment until she did everything she was told. He did not want to hear her arguments. Only punishment, only control and silence. Adriana really tried to change something, looked for a solution to the conflict, but unfortunately, everything was unsuccessful. Nothing worked, the situation remained difficult, and was not resolved despite all her efforts. In response to the growing tension, she clenched her fists, and her teeth chattered with nervousness. As if trying to deflect guilt, she apologized to her parents, explaining that she must have been out of her mind and simply couldn't control herself. She added that she was genuinely ashamed of her words and actions, not understanding what had come over her. Her words were full of remorse, and she could not explain why she had done this, losing all self-confidence. After her confession, her mother approached her and, holding back her emotions, said that she was ready to forgive her. However, to do this, she needed to continue working because it was not that difficult, and she could correct her mistake through action. Adriana, hearing her mother's words, decided that she needed to continue working for her family. She calmly said that she did not find it difficult because she loved working for the good of her loved ones and was ready to make an effort. She did not add that she also wanted to earn money to pay back her tuition fees, but her mother, noticing her desire, replied that she was too young and needed to focus on household chores rather than financial issues. The young lady, hearing the remark, said that she knew that Jennifer, despite her young age, had already taken a job as a maid. She realized how little she had been helping her family and was now determined to do even more. In fact, her father used these drugs not to treat his sick grandmother, but to sell them. He believed that this was a profitable business that would bring him considerable profit, although he did not care about his grandmother's health. He was very pleased to hear such words from his daughter, and at that moment, he suggested that she become even more useful. He said that if she wanted to help, she should do it much better, and offered his help. The older brother, who was watching this scene, could not help but understand how naive and stupid his sister was acting. He thought that she had no idea about real life and its complexities. He, however, felt that she herself was to blame for everything. even if she did not realize it. He was convinced that she should have shown more caution and maturity in her actions in order to avoid such situations. The next day, Adriana Woods took a job as a maid in the home of the richest family in the province. She decided to help her family in this way, hoping that her efforts would give some hope for improving their situation. The owner of the house, having heard about her hard work and diligence, promised to pay her twice as much as the other maids. Adriana's family was very happy with this source of income and expected changes in their financial situation. However, a month later she would have to face the consequences of her decisions because she decided that after receiving her first salary, she would disappear, not intending to help her family anymore. This decision was unexpected for everyone. At this time, Adriana gradually settled into the home of Baron Jefferson, who was known for his wealth and influence. Her life in the mansion, although it started out difficult, soon began to improve, and she began to get used to the new rhythm. The head maid, observing Adriana, noticed that she did not look like her peers. She looked at her closely, trying to understand what could be hidden behind her appearance and why she seemed so unusual for her age group. Adriana, noticing the attention of the head maid, replied that all the women in her family were short. This explanation, as it turned out, was enough for the head maid not to ask unnecessary questions about it. The head maid, satisfied with the explanation, said that in that case, there would be no such choice of height among those working in the house, and suggested that Adriana write her name in the appropriate field. This was no problem for the girl, since she had learned to write as a child. It was a contract. It stated that if the girl leaves before 3 months, there will be no salary. Also, if she runs away from the country, the head maid will make sure that she can no longer return home, so she should keep that in mind. She liked the new girl. It seemed she had big plans for her. She ordered another maid to take her where she needed to go, where there was a place. Bad told the people to get ready quickly, because they don't have enough hands. The girl immediately agreed and ran. Ariana was very worried that she would not be accepted here, either because what those girls said at the market turned out to be true. They said that Baron Jefferson would definitely accept her. She added 2 years to her age, and it worked, and no one even thought about what she was taking. Beth said that only he would accept little girls like her, even if he really needed maids. But it doesn't matter, because the woman was sure that if the young lady wanted to work, she would try, because there was also a shortage of hands here, so they took her without a letter of recommendation, despite the fact that this was a family of aristocrats. Look, she said that she would try very hard, but it was skeptical, and she said that if people stay here for at least 3 months, then believe her. She was ordered to choose between cleaning and cooking, and so on, and replied that she really liked cooking. She dreamed about how she would work here until she grew up, save up money, and then open her own cafe or restaurant. She will be able to learn how to cook different dishes in the kitchen, so it would be great to become a cook. But suddenly my dreams were shattered immediately. After the words, "bad," she said that the girl will be cleaning. The woman also added that they should be clothes. But it is not a fact that it is such a small size. It will be found. So if she finds something, she will immediately give it. She threw her into the hall and ordered her to try to hold out here as long as possible. Once in the new room, she noticed a different housekeeper. She greeted her, expecting some answers. The woman introduced herself as Galena and immediately ordered Adriana to wipe that spot. She also said that if the girl finished cleaning, she could rest. The young lady asked where her room was, to which the woman replied that their rooms were on the 4th floor and she could choose any free bed. It seemed like a great place to her because she knew how to clean, and if she could hold out here, she would probably get the job she wanted. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace, Sargenet was very angry because he could not talk to the young heir to the throne. He was so angry that he called His Majesty a fool. But the boy replied that even a wall has ears, so one must be careful. Then Sargenet gave them one piece of advice: find your own path in life and not rely on this fool, because if he continued like this, he might one day lose his head because of the emperor. But the boy was sure that Emperor Mikhail was not a fool, and the teacher replied that only Sargenite thought so. Meanwhile, the guy understood that these were just scientists. He was not given the ability to understand what a bookworm who had never been in business could truly know. He did not understand how a scholar could be such a fool and call His Majesty an idiot when his former master, the emperor's father, was much smarter than anyone else in this country. Proof of this was the fact that he was a relative of the imperial family, lived in prosperity, and had the status of a duke. However, the gentleman and his wife suddenly died of unknown causes, and by order of the emperor, Prince Michael was sent to an estate outside the city where he lived in secret from everyone. Jorge understood that if the boy had been looked after by an ordinary nanny and not by heartless mercenaries, he would not have become like this. Suddenly, in principle, Kiel approached him. He was silent as always. Then the boy knelt down before him, greeted him, and said that his name was Jorhelmi, and that he had served Prince Antonio. He also said that His Majesty the Emperor had ordered the boy to be brought to the palace. He added that from now on his name would be Mikhail Sonnet, and he would be the crown prince of this empire. But the guy answered only one word: tree. And Jorge did not understand this answer, so he asked again. The young man did not answer, simply repeating the word tree. In this situation, it made him very angry. He gathered everyone and asked why no one reported anything to him. But he was told that the reports were correct, and moreover that they had been sent personally by His Majesty. And then he asked what exactly had been written. And then they replied that the letters said that he was doing a great job, and that he should continue to work as he was. The guy understood that even if he returned to the past, he would hardly change anything. He came in with a guilty look on his face and started apologizing for introducing him to that nasty guy. He was furious, scolded him, and immediately threw him out. Suddenly, the guy said Adriana's name, and it sounded so strange and out of place that the guy froze, not understanding how he even knew her. Confused, he asked again what exactly the prince meant, since the girl's name should not have appeared in the conversation, especially in such a context. Then the guy, as if on purpose, said Adriana's name even louder, emphasizing its importance, as if he deliberately wanted to provoke a reaction and prove something with it. At this time, the main character was busy cleaning when she was suddenly called to the kitchen. There was a shortage of workers, and help was urgently needed, so she hurried. The long-awaited chance had finally arrived. Working in the kitchen had been her dream, and now that she had been called there, she felt almost like a winner and was jubilant inside. The butler strictly ordered her to leave everything and immediately prepare for a new job. The girl thanked her reservedly and immediately went to change her clothes with slight excitement. A week had passed since the day she had appeared in this house, and during this time small changes had begun to occur in the atmosphere and in her own life. The butler reminded her once again that she needed to wash her hands thoroughly before work, because cleanliness, especially in the kitchen, should be an unshakable rule for everyone. She was in seventh heaven because not only did she get into the kitchen, but she also found a common language with the other maids, feeling like part of the team and needed. She couldn't wait to share her joy, so she told another maid that she was now working in the kitchen. The other maid was happy for her and gave her some suitable work clothes. The military lady hadn't changed at all. She just did as much as she could and kept coming up to ask where else she could clean, because even the senior cleaner couldn't find fault with anything. She didn't even show half of her skills, but the girl caused admiration among the surrounding maids. She tried to avoid praise, even though it turned out to be sincere. In the past, she was so blinded by the praise of her relatives that she could not understand what was happening. But these words were honest. Bet gave her a gift instead of praise, and this was only the beginning because she wants to learn how to cook well and sell food to earn a lot of money. She understood that here she could learn everything there was to know. The young emperor's subordinates understood what the boy was talking about. It was Adriana, the same girl with red hair. He asked the guy if he was talking about her. After all, she was the one who found him, and the guy answered Adriana. He didn't say anything else. The subordinate asked if the guy wanted to see her. He was extremely happy because it was the first word he finally understood. He decided that he would find her no matter what. The first thing the head cook asked our heroine was why she was so thin. It seems our girl has heard this question somewhere before. Sophia wasn't sure that the girl would cope with such a tough job in the kitchen because she was very fragile. She asked Emily to bring an apple pie that was left at the neighbor's. As soon as the girl saw him, she immediately started drooling. The woman told her to stop looking and sit down to eat. Perhaps she wants to fatten her up and then send her back to cleaning, which is what the girl was most worried about. When she tasted the pie, she immediately felt great pleasure. It was incredibly delicious, and she experienced a lot of emotions. It was the first time she had eaten such a delicious pie. But Sophia replied that it was not surprising, because she had made it herself. Sophia shared the secret that only the head maid could taste the pie, to which Adriana asked if there was anything wrong with her eating it. Sophia replied that if she didn't eat her fill, there would be no one to work in the kitchen. The lady thanked her and continued eating, but the woman asked her not to hurry, because no one would take the pie away from her. In her past life, the main character did not know how to cook and spent all her money on food. She promised herself that in this life she would learn to cook deliciously and open a restaurant, and in the meantime, they began to call for the night. The family asked to find their daughter. Everyone cried bitterly and begged to find her. They were checking that if they found her daughter, they would do anything. Meanwhile, the grandmother was saying again that she was supposed to die, and that was when the emperor's assistant realized that Adriana Woods had left home. But her father replied that she could not have done that, since she had most likely been deceived by some scoundrel. He asked how a man could say such things, since it was neither a kidnapping nor a murder. He asked how she had disappeared. The mother in tears began to say that the girl loved her family very much, was a kind child. She said that she would return on the first weekend, but that was exactly a week ago, and after that nothing was heard from her. They said that she got into a carriage heading to Tattoo, and suddenly something happened to her. Macia was very worried, but it was the closest town to the village, and the assistant thought about it. It seemed that he began to understand what was happening. The family told how they had spent all their savings, but still could not find her. Then the boy asked how old she was. They said she was 14. He immediately realized that she was too young to work as a servant. Often poor people sell their daughters to other people, and he realized that this couple did not love their child as much as they claimed. Village girls often run away after their first salary, unable to withstand the hard work, and this is not surprising. Perhaps these people were looking for Adriana because they missed her and loved her. He saw no point in talking to them anymore, so he silently turned around and started to leave, despite their requests. He didn't understand where this girl could have disappeared to, because all she could do was work as a maid. Perhaps her parents searched Tatum, and most likely she fled to another city, or maybe even to the capital. The knight finally swore to his master that he would not let him down. He felt a complete responsibility and knew that he had to find the girl by any means necessary, no matter what. At this point, Adriana had already finished washing dishes in the kitchen. She had worked there for a month, but had never picked up a knife or touched a pie crust. The head cook clearly did not trust her with such duties. Despite this, Adriana found positives in her job. She enjoyed eating the food that Sophia prepared, and she was not in a hurry. She was in no rush, and she enjoyed every moment. The woman asked her to eat more slowly again, reminding her that she might choke. Adriana, carried away by the taste, forgot about the time, and Sophia worried about her safety. Sophia couldn't help but ask why Adriana wanted to work in the kitchen so much. The girl honestly admitted that she dreamed of learning how to cook. It was important for her to master this skill and understand how to cook herself. This confirmed her thoughts. Sophia added that the girl was probably offended that she had never held a knife in her hands, and could not even knead dough. Adriana admitted that there was some truth in this. With a slight smile, Adriana said that at first she was very upset, but these thoughts quickly disappeared. Now she enjoys delicious food without worrying about not being trusted with such simple tasks. Her words made the woman laugh. Adriana felt a little embarrassed, thinking that maybe she said something wrong. She was happy, but she also felt that not everything could be perfect. The woman was surprised that her food was really that tasty. And Adriana replied that she felt happy when she ate it. Sophia, smiling, said that from tomorrow, the girl would no longer wash the dishes. Then Sophia suggested that Adriana start with easier tasks, like peeling onions or potatoes. She also promised to teach her how to cook, which added to the girl's joy. Adriana's eyes sparkled with happiness. She had not expected such news and was immensely happy. It all seemed incredible to her, but she was sure that this was the beginning of her new path. Sophia, looking at the girl sternly, warned her that now she would have to follow all her instructions. The girl agreed without hesitation, because she had long dreamed of learning everything as Sophia could, and was ready to work for this. Meanwhile, Baron Jefferson's friend Oleg came to visit him, and the Baron realized that in this situation he had no choice but to rely on his maids, hoping that they would work harder. The Baron's wife reported that His Majesty would arrive late, and now that everything was calm, it was time to start training the maids because they clearly did not show due diligence in their work. The Baron was not at all happy with the state of affairs, and realized that now he and his wife would have to train these ignorant maids themselves, since there was no one among the servants that could be trusted. After the death of his brother, the Baron inherited the title, and it seemed that now all the luxury of an aristocrat's life would be revealed to him. But despite this, he was never invited to important social events, and certainly not to a ball. A meeting with high-ranking guests could have been his only chance, but the Baron did not yet know what awaited him. The next morning, all the maids gathered around the table to eat, and although it was an ordinary moment of the day, there was an unusual atmosphere in the air. Every room had a special feeling, as if something important was about to happen. Suddenly, one of the maids approached Sophia and informed her that they had been instructed to prepare the table for dinner. Sophia, having listened to the request with interest, immediately realized that this would not be an ordinary dinner, but preparation for something more important. This news really pleased the woman, because it meant that most likely special guests were coming, and the preparation for such a dinner would be special. She immediately began to think about how best to organize all the work. Soon it became known that Sir Jorge, who serves His Majesty, would arrive. This surprised everyone because this man's visit was completely unexpected. Everyone thought that he was not due to arrive until the following week. Adriana Woods had no trouble recognizing who stood before her. Sir Jorge was familiar to her. His name was associated with important events and familiar people from her past. Jorge was one of the closest confidants to the most cruel and ruthless tyrant in history. Jorge was cold, which gave his personality an even darker shade. In the brutal struggle for the throne, all the emperor's heirs died, and the throne was taken by the crown prince, Michael Sonnet de Frand. An orphan and relative of the emperor, Sir Jorge was the only one who remained loyal to the prince, and Michael listened to his advice in everything. However, shortly before the prince came of age, the current emperor died, and Michael, having ascended to the throne, began to lose his mind. Therefore, only Sir Jorge could stop the cruel emperor. Thanks to his advice, Michael replaced the death penalty with a long imprisonment in a dungeon. But later he was killed, and no one could hold back Emperor Michael. One day when the emperor himself was killed, the girl remembered that the boy had the same name. It was strange that the aristocrat and the tyrant had the same names. However, she did not understand why the emperor's confidant was heading here. Perhaps nothing will happen, because she is only a servant in the kitchen. But so far, everything was fine. The character will only show after the coronation. Meanwhile, Sir Jorge came to the Baron. The lady was sure that there was no need to worry as long as she did not catch the assistant's eye. At this time, Jorge was very happy because he quickly found this girl. All that a 14-year-old village girl can do in the capital is be a servant. He checked the houses where there is a lack of hearing and soon found her, but it was still necessary to maintain order and bring her to the palace so that it does not harm the princess. Baron Jefferson would be perfect for this. If he offered him connections with high society, it would be quite possible to present the maids as distant relatives. Then there would be no problem with appointing Adriana Woods as an official servant in the palace, and he would finally have a chance to satisfy the prince's desire. Meanwhile, all the maids were working very hard in the kitchen, not falling into the hands of the assistants. They did not stop interfering, lighting the fire hotter so as to be in time for the arrival of the assistant. Work in the kitchen was in full swing. Meanwhile, our heroine was also working hard. It was the first time she had been so busy in the kitchen, peeling potatoes with complete care and concentration. Usually when high-ranking guests are expected, they announce them in advance. But today, a person from the imperial court is arriving, and without warning, it all seems very strange. The girl knew that she was just a doll in this game, but she could not understand whether the situation was so serious that she had to come to the Baron for a visit. Suddenly, Sophia heard terrible news that shook her to the core. Confused, she realized that the situation could become a real disaster. One of the maids came with important information. There was no silverware. This news was a real shock for everyone. It is difficult to remain calm at such moments. Silverware is not just tableware. It is reserved for the most distinguished guests, and its absence was an alarm signal. It did not bode well. Sophia, worried, decided that Emily should inform the lady about this, but the girl said that the lady was busy now because she was receiving an important guest, Sir Jorge. Sophia, unable to contain herself, replied that Emily did not understand the lady's character. If she did not report the missing dishes right away, the lady would not only punish everyone, but also send them to search for the silver. Emily panicked. The thought of being sent out naked to search for silver made her worry that she would be punished for failing. However, Sophia assured that this would not happen in front of Sir Jorge and insisted that Emily immediately carry out the order. The maid, gathering all her strength, rushed in the indicated direction. The palace had seemed surprisingly calm lately, but now they were faced with their first serious problem, which would bring unpleasant consequences for everyone. Most likely the new maids would be fired because of the missing silver. It was clear to everyone that, if the silverware could not be found, the consequences would be very grave for everyone. Sophia tried to calm those around her, saying that there was no need to worry. She was sure that the fire was well aware of who could have stolen the silver and would deal with it. The head maid couldn't understand how the new girl could stay here for even a month if she couldn't figure out such simple things as normal speech. At this point, the Baron's woman appeared to ask if it was true that the cutlery had gone missing. She looked worried, not knowing what to do in this situation. The girl confirmed that this was indeed the case, and the woman, clutching her head, said that she did not understand what to do, now having found herself in such an absurd situation. The woman realized that she needed to find the culprit as quickly as possible. Otherwise, he might escape, and everything would remain unsolved, which would only make the situation worse. Sophia said that if Sir Jorge left, the silverware would already be sold. This put everyone in an awkward position, and the girl could not disagree. She suggested apologizing to Sir Jorge and finding the culprit, and to do this, she needed to carefully check all the places where the missing dishes could have been hidden. The young lady was very upset. She could not imagine how such important things could be so easily overlooked, especially in the presence of an honored guest. The lady agreed with this because everyone could be among them. Although the last time the devices were used was yesterday, she hoped that everything was not as serious as it seemed. The woman added that Sophia probably does not understand the complexity of the situation because she does not have the proper education to correctly assess everything that is happening. In the end, she came to the conclusion that the incident most likely occurred during a visit. The maids, in turn, did not know how to act now. Meanwhile, Sophia turned to the cooks in the kitchen, realizing that even though the cutlery was missing, it did not mean that Sir Jorge would refuse to eat. She gave the order to immediately prepare the usual utensils for eating. The main character couldn't understand why the problems started at the very moment she showed up. In addition to the visit of a high-ranking guest, the silver went missing, and she had a hard time keeping her thoughts in order. Everything seemed to be falling out of her hands. Suddenly, the butler came up to her. He called Adriana without explaining what exactly was going on, but his tone was serious, and it made her wary. The lady was completely confused, not understanding what had happened. She had not done anything that could have caused such suspicions, but she felt that something was wrong. He did not explain what was happening, but he took her hand firmly. He added that if she argued or told everything here, the consequences for her would be worse. Adriana didn't understand what was happening around her, but at that moment she felt that she had no choice, and she had to follow him without even having the opportunity to resist. The butler silently led Adriana Woods to the master, not saying a word along the way. The lady felt the growing tension and was already preparing for the worst. The lady wondered if perhaps she was the one suspected of stealing the cutlery, since its disappearance was connected with her presence in that place. Adriana fell to her knees in panic, begging for mercy. She immediately insisted that she had never touched the missing dishes and could not have been involved in this matter. She was next to the cook all this time and asked the gentleman to question her so that everything would be cleared up, but he only coldly replied that he had not invited her at all because of the silverware. The gentleman discovered the brooch that Adriana had hidden in her bed. She could not believe that it had been found and did not know how to explain its presence in her room. The brooch was important to her, and she hid it under her mattress for fear of losing it. But now her secret was out, and the consequences were to be known. Adriana quickly said that she did not steal the brooch. The gentleman did not believe her words and asked where she got the thing from. Trying to find out the truth, Adriana replied that she did not know who the owner of the brooch was, and this caused the gentleman to smile. He watched her smiling slightly, as if evaluating her words. The gentleman chuckled, noting that she probably didn't really know who the thing belonged to. He added that it would have been better if she had said that she had simply found it. The lady replied that if she had really found the brooch, she would have returned it to its owner. She could not keep such a valuable thing for herself. It would not be right. The gentleman accepted her words, deciding to believe her. There seemed to be a small spark of hope in her eyes, as if she sensed that the situation was beginning to change. However, suddenly, the gentleman said that if the lady told the whole truth, he would then believe her. His words were serious, and he clearly expected honesty from her. He was curious about what she could get such a thing for. Then she told him how she once helped a man in the forest, not knowing what it would lead to. He was intrigued by this, and he added with interest that she had just confessed to her deed. The lady did not understand what was happening. Her thoughts were confused. He asked if she really didn't understand what this thing was. He looked at her carefully, as if expecting her to reveal all the secrets hidden behind her words. She could not imagine that this brooch could fall into her hands. In her opinion, it was definitely not her thing, and she was sure that she was right. Adriana tried to justify herself, hoping that the gentleman had misunderstood her. However, he no longer wanted to listen to her, as if he had decided that the truth remained a mystery to him. At that moment, all the maids entered the master's room. Their appearance interrupted the tense atmosphere, and they looked at the situation with the hope that everything would be resolved. The maids decided to vouch for her because they were sure that she was innocent. Their confidence and support gave Adriana strength, and she felt some protection. Bet added confidently that Adriana was not someone who would commit crimes, like stealing silverware. She knew her well and was confident in her honesty. Bet also stated that she had no idea why Adriana was being questioned. Apparently, she had been lied to, and did not understand why she was being questioned. Sophia, as another witness, confirmed Bet's words. She saw Adriana enter her room that night and knew that she had nothing to do with the case. Another maid stood up for Adriana, explaining that their rooms were next to each other, and that if the girl had acted strangely, she would have noticed. All the maids started to defend her. It was a real surprise for Adriana. She was not used to having someone on her side in such situations. At this point, the gentleman, having listened to them, declared that the girls could go, since everything had been cleared up. He said that they could return to their business. But Adriana's brother, along with the others, objected. He declared that he would return to his duties only after Adriana went with them, as had been decided. Sophia added that the kitchen was clearly short of workers at the moment, and they would not be able to cope with the workload without Adriana's help. They desperately needed her help. This statement made the guy very angry. He demanded that these conversations be stopped immediately and that they return to their places, threatening everyone for disobedience. The women stood firm and were not going to leave without taking the girl with them. Their determination was so strong that they did not allow anyone or anything to stop them. The man, however, did not do all this for some silverware. As one might think, the reason was much deeper, and it soon became obvious. Then they asked him why he was acting so strangely and unreasonably. Despite the appearance of motivation, he only remained silent in response, not wanting to reveal the secret. The man instantly recognized the voice and realized with alarm that it was the emperor's assistant himself, Jorge. He was known for his decisiveness and authority. Jorge walked into the room, out of the blue, unexpectedly for everyone. His presence changed the atmosphere, and everyone immediately felt that something serious was happening. Parole hearing, it was very scared, and understood that he had to be obedient. He immediately began to carry out all of Jorge's instructions, knowing that he would not tolerate mistakes. The emperor's assistant was sure that this was about silverware that had been passed down from generation to generation. However, as it turned out, he was very wrong. The gentleman added that they had important matters to discuss, and it would be better for everyone to send the girls back without detaining them. That way, they could return to their duties. The Baron, hearing this, exploded with anger again and shouted at the maids. He ordered them to return to work immediately, without losing a minute and without arguing. Sophia and Adriana were discussing how much work they had to do as they headed to the kitchen. Then our heroine asked if the woman was interested in what had actually happened. Notara laughed, noting that this situation was not unique. The girl was not the first to be placed in such harsh conditions. This had happened more than once. The woman said that similar incidents had happened before. Now it was their turn, and no one could truly understand the behavior of these aristocrats. The aristocrats did have a lot of important things to do, and Adriana was going to help them, so she needed to get back to the business she was here for as soon as possible. The main character agreed with this proposal, deciding to continue working with a smile as planned. She clearly understood that she needed to move on. In the silence, in the huge setting, Jorge could not resist and decided to find out why the Baron had interrogated the maid. The questions piled up, and his interest only grew. Someone said that there was nothing unusual about this. He also noted that at that moment the Emperor's assistant should have been with his wife and not engaged in an investigation. However, he replied that he had heard screams, so he decided to come over and find out what was going on. His concern was justified, and he could not leave the situation unattended. Besides, something really interesting was going on here. The Ram was furious because all this happened because of the maids, because of whom he missed an important chance. He told me that a brooch with an imperial design had been found on the bed of one of the maids. This discovery immediately struck him as strange, and he felt that some secret was hidden there. An ordinary maid would not have such expensive items, so it is likely that she received them from someone as payment for services or other reward. The unexpected appearance of the gray orchis could be proof of this. Obviously, his arrival was connected with the brooch. If it weren't for him, the Baron wouldn't have dared to delve into this matter. Perhaps Sir Jorge has uncovered the Baron's lie. If so, he will have to tell the truth, because it will now be impossible to avoid revealing the truth. Gritting his teeth, the Baron realized that he had no choice. He remained silent, not knowing what else to say, and unable to bear it any longer, he put the object on the table, finally giving in. The Baron, however, testified that the whole situation had happened because of the brooch. He explained that its presence had forced him to begin an investigation. Sir Jorge was very surprised, because he could not understand how this maid could have ended up in such a situation. He did not know where they could have found this thing. The Baron replied that the brooch belonged to that same maid. He was sure that she had stolen it, so he was going to interrogate her to find out the truth. However, now that doubts had arisen, the Baron admitted that she was most likely innocent. He decided to ask how the Emperor's assistant felt about the matter. Soon the Baron decided to get down to business and ask directly what the Emperor's great assistant needed from a simple Baron. He had an important matter to discuss, but without wasting any time, he immediately proposed a deal. The Baron was determined and wanted to get clarity on this issue as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the maids continued their work, but their mood was clearly good. They communicated with each other, creating an atmosphere of ease and goodwill. The main character was very worried, not understanding what had happened. She did not know what she would do in such a situation, but she suspected that something was wrong with Sir Jorge. Questions were spinning in her head. Should she trust him if she told the truth? And what exactly had really happened? At that moment she was suddenly called. The butler informed her that Sarherkia was calling her again. His words were serious, and it seemed important, but Sophia could not understand why it was so urgent. Sophia was very surprised, as this had never happened before. It was something new, and she could not understand what had caused such a challenge. Without wasting any time, Sophia stood up for the girl. She said that she would not let her go until she found out what was going on. She was determined to find out the truth. However, the gentleman replied that he himself did not know the reasons for this order. He was simply instructed to transfer Adriana Woods, and he carried out the order without having full information. He added that if the girl did not agree to go, he would go down personally. This made Sophia wary, because she did not expect the situation to take such a turn. Gathering all her resolve, the girl clenched her fists and declared that she would go with him herself. She was ready to face what was waiting for her ahead. She opened the doors and immediately apologized for the intrusion. Her action was unexpected, but she felt she had to do it, despite her fear. Inside, she saw Sir Jorge and the Emperor's assistant. The atmosphere was strange and tense, which gave her a strong feeling of unease. Sophia froze on the threshold, not knowing what to do next. Thoughts flashed through her head, and every movement seemed too important to her. On the ferry, they asked her to get on as quickly as possible. The situation was becoming increasingly unusual, and she felt that time was running out. The girl said that she had never stolen anything, and no one had incited her. She tried to prove her innocence, hoping that her words would be heard. The Baron did not let the girl finish interrupting her mid-sentence. He said that he did not believe her words, since it was unlikely that his distant relative would act so meanly and basely. All he said only made the lady more puzzled. He informed her that Adriana's mother was his third cousin, and this added even more confusion to her thoughts. The lady could not understand why he said this, and she did not seem to believe him. Her surprise grew with every word, but she still could not find an explanation for his words. He pointed to Mr. Jorge and said that he wanted to take her to his palace as a servant. It was an unexpected and rather strange statement on his part. The Baron explained that although he was a baron, he was still a nobleman. They had the right to be in the palace, but not enough authority to be around the prince all the time. The lady suddenly realized that the Baron intended to marry her off to a relative and send her to the palace. She did not understand why he needed this, and this worried her. The Baron, as if not noticing her confusion, asked her to call him uncle. This gesture confused her even more and made her feel trapped. He added that the place in the palace was an honorary position, but in the end, she would still die. It sounded like a death sentence, as if her life had already been decided. The Baron declared that she would work diligently, but the other children objected. These words made her feel that her fate had been decided by someone else without her participation. She asked him to think again about his decision. Meanwhile, Jorge enjoyed what was happening without any concern for the consequences for the girl. The main character asked to reconsider her decision because she felt helpless and unsure of her abilities. She was afraid that she would only harm her family. She insisted that he think again. In response, he confidently said that she had nothing to worry about because his wife had told him about her excellent abilities and was watching her. He added that if there was no trust, the maids would hardly have stood up for her, which meant that her approach to the matter was quite reliable and trustworthy. However, the girl did not want to leave, as she enjoyed staying in the estate, working in the kitchen, being close to those she knew, and with whom she felt comfortable. She wanted special treatment, and therefore insistently asked him to reconsider his decision. But he had only one thought in mind: to get rid of her for the sake of his own prestige. He didn't know how much she liked her current position, but he asked her not to act the way she did. In his eyes, there was no room for compromise on this issue. He ordered her to stand up. She wanted to say something in response, but he stopped her, telling her to pull herself together and stop saying unnecessary things in this situation. He walked up to her and, looking at her angrily, said that he didn't like this whole scene. He was irritated by what was happening, and his patience was quickly running out. The girl was wrong, and now she realized that despite her requests, he was not going to listen to her. In the end, she thanked him for his attention, realizing that it was all useless. Jorge realized that the decision had been made, and without wasting any time, asked her if they could leave immediately. He added that her things were already in the carriage ready to go. She was also concerned about the return of the brooch, but the emperor's assistant replied that it was too valuable to hand over immediately. He promised that the brooch would be returned upon arrival at the palace. Despite all the circumstances, she still could not forget about her maids and expressed a desire to at least say goodbye to them before leaving. This was an important moment for her. Unlike her, he was keen to finish the process as quickly as possible. He explained that Mr. Jorge was too busy to waste time on goodbyes and assured her that he would personally hand over her things to the maids. The main character understood that her situation had changed dramatically. She moved toward the carriage, not wanting it, but realizing that now she was already here in this place and could not go back. Mr. Jorge warned her not to get out of the carriage until he gave her permission. His words sounded like a strict order that had to be followed without question. She asked if she would go alone, hoping that she could wait for a convenient moment to escape. But her hopes of freedom grew more illusory with every question she asked. Mr. Jorge was a master at reading people. He immediately noticed on her face what she was trying to hide. Her intentions did not escape his attention. She wanted to escape. Despite this, she decided to get out of the situation, saying that it would be better for her to go alone. There were only men around, but Jorge immediately replied that no one would pay attention to the maid. She found a way to turn the situation in her favor by claiming that she was now related to Baron Jefferson. If rumors about her began to spread, it could even hurt the Baron. Mr. Jorge hit himself on the head. He could not understand why he had chosen this particular maid for his trip. His thoughts were filled with questions about his mistake. The lady then asked to tell the Baron that it was a mistake and that she was not at all suitable for His Highness. She hoped that this would rectify the situation. However, Jorge could not fulfill her request. Instead, he agreed with her words, adding that she was completely right, but he could not do as she wanted. Jorge said that, although she was a distant relative of the Baron, he recognized her personally. Therefore, it would be inappropriate for a stranger to ride in the same carriage with her, since she was not the prince's servant. The protagonist asked her to go alone, assuring her that the worst would be avoided. He knew that if Sir Jorge or the other servants had gone with her, she would not have dared to escape. The gentleman, worried about what was happening, asked her to remain calm and not to interfere. He believed that this was the only way she could avoid unpleasant consequences. He said they would race straight to the palace and insisted she not even think about running away. His words were resolute, leaving little hope for freedom. The horses, led by a confident hand, quickly moved from their place, beginning their fast and inexorable run. Everything happened so quickly that the heroine barely had time to react. The pace was so fast that the girl even felt a shock at the start, not expecting such speed. Everything happened so abruptly that she had no time to react. She couldn't understand why she was still sitting in the carriage, nor why Sir Jorge was taking her to the castle, since she knew she had to escape as quickly as possible. In the palace, she would still be considered a servant, despite her relationship with the Baron. Moreover, her master would soon become the future tyrant, which only worsened the situation. She didn't even have time to realize how quickly they got there. Everything happened so fast that she didn't even have time to understand what happened. But Sir Jorge was already scolding the knights. The heroine's thoughts did not linger on this moment. She understood that now only one thing was needed: to use the opportunity and escape without wasting time on thinking. Sir Jorge continued to shout at his subordinates, his voice full of discontent. This gave the heroine a chance. Very quietly, she slipped out of the carriage, hoping not to attract attention. He was apparently angry with his knights, demanding more from them. Meanwhile, the main character took advantage of the moment and quickly ran towards the bushes, hoping for cover. Adriana was surprised to see such beauty in front of her. It was a garden, but there was too much greenery to call it ordinary. The gaze was lost among the vegetation. Fortunately, there was a place to hide if she met the gardener. She could say that she was a new servant who had come with Baron Jefferson and had gotten lost. She planned to spend the night here and in the morning, following the sun, find a way to get out of this mysterious place. Everything had to be decided the next morning. Now all she could do was pretend it was unlikely that anyone would look for a runaway maid, but it still wouldn't hurt to be careful, especially in a place like this. Suddenly, she realized that she had somehow found herself in the very center of a strange labyrinth of green leaves. She didn't know where to go, but her intuition told her to move. Her job now was to hold out until morning. Then she simply had to move toward the rising sun and hope that it would lead her to the exit. But first, she had to somehow get out of this labyrinth. The green mass surrounded her on all sides, and the exit was not obvious. She wandered through the labyrinth for a long time, but there was no end in sight. If she screamed, she could be heard, but the air was so stuffy that it became difficult for her to breathe. Adriana didn't know where to go next, but suddenly she noticed a light shining through the greenery. It was a faint but reassuring glow. She realized that she needed to get to this light because it could be her chance to get out of this strange and disturbing place. Suddenly, among the greenery, she saw him. Mikhail was standing in the field, holding a flower in his hands. But upon seeing her, he instantly blushed and became very embarrassed. Mikhail didn't know how to act when he saw her. He immediately felt shy, as his unexpected meeting with Adriana took him by surprise. Everything that was happening seemed to the heroine to be just a restless dream. She could not believe that this was reality. So strange and unexpected was every moment of their meeting. The boy handed her a bouquet of flowers that could only be found in the mountains, in places where nature itself seemed to create beauty. He seemed confident in his gesture. The heroine thought she understood the meaning of these flowers, but something in the guy's behavior indicated that he knew that their paths would cross again in the future. She couldn't imagine how he could end up in such a restaurant, but the guy confidently answered her that it was all the result of fate, that their meeting was inevitable. At that moment, the girl froze, realizing that everything that was happening to her was too different from what she expected. Her thoughts were confused into one unclear picture, but he simply smiled, saying the word fate again. His confidence in the concept made her wonder if perhaps fate really did exist. She couldn't understand what the word meant to him, but somehow it seemed more appropriate for the novel's protagonist than for her own life. Suddenly, her gaze caught a thin, bloody trace on her hand. The guy noticed it and, worried about her health, hurried to bandage her hand. His concern was obvious. The girl, surprised by his actions, asked how he ended up in this garden. Since this place belonged to the prince himself, her question was full of bewilderment and interest. To her surprise, the guy only answered with one word: mosquito. This caused her to think a lot, and she wondered what exactly could be hidden behind this answer. And then she suddenly realized that he was using the word as an analogy to mosquitoes that appear unexpectedly and disturb the peace, as if upsetting the balance of a calm life. The girl realized that it was now clear to her that he had sneaked in here. His mysterious words, in response to her guesses, only added to the intrigue, and he seemed to be playing a game. She realized that he must have been feeling under pressure, because despite his youth, he was forced to cope with difficulties that were beyond the strength of a young man. The guy probably had to go through difficulties, but despite this, he was still able to find the positives in the situation, which made his behavior more resilient and optimistic. At some point, the guy handed her a small ball, saying it was a chick. This strange but sweet offer made the girl curious and surprised. She was shocked when she first saw such fruits, but her interest in them was so great that she could not resist the desire to taste them. As soon as she tasted these berries, her heart was filled with delight. She could not help but fall in love with their extraordinary delicious taste. She exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious, to which the guy, smiling, said only one word: "and." The answer seemed a little strange to her, but she did not attach any importance to it. Once in the imperial palace, the girl noticed that even the fruits here were different from those in her native places. Probably the guy wanted to say that everything here is in abundance, like ants in an anthill. The girl, a little worried, asked if they would be considered criminals if they ate the fruit. The guy calmly replied, "Foam." This calmed the girl down, and her doubts were dispelled. Having found that all her fears were unfounded, she decided that she would enjoy these fruits and eat as many of them as she could without any restrictions. They had a fun and carefree time until suddenly the girl noticed something interesting in the distance, which immediately caught her attention and made her concentrate. Looking more closely, she noticed a narrow path that led towards the exit. This discovery was quite significant for her at the time. She began to think that this path might lead to some secret place created by the personal order of the prince. That is how she interpreted this mysterious find. She already assumed that no one would find her tomorrow, but despite this, she was worried and concerned that her absence would raise questions from others. This place in the future will become the place where the power of a cruel tyrant will unfold. The main character understood perfectly well that his influence will be enormous. Even if this young man was a descendant of noble aristocrats, he could not just walk around without consequences. So she asked if he had run away again. The guy was silent. His gaze remained indifferent, which immediately made it clear that he had again acted as he had done before, although he had no need for it. The heroine thought about it. She herself was no better. After all, she too had run away in her time. However, she still felt that the situation no longer made sense to her. She realized that her attitude towards this issue had changed dramatically. Previously, she had tolerated it, but now it was clear she would not tolerate it anymore. Inquiring how long he intended to stay in this place, she realized that he had most likely escaped more than once. His behavior had become predictable to her. The guy replied that it was like a hamster wheel, and she replied that a real escape is when you leave forever, and not in a place where they can find you. He was silent for a few seconds, and then he said the word unicorn. It was strange, but it also had some meaning for him that she didn't immediately grasp. She couldn't understand why it was so important to him. In her eyes, there was no point in running away and coming back, but she felt that he was different from everyone else. Having said that, if he didn't want to, he didn't have to say anything. She added that in any case, everyone's reasons were the same. She understood that many guys ran away for the same reason. The girl met many people like her, who like her fled to the capital. Looking at their faces, she heard their stories. They were all looking for their place in this world. All of them who were near the heroine could no longer bear life with their own family. Their suffering was so strong that they decided to run away. The heroine was full of hatred for her mother, father, and grandmother because she felt how they deceived her. The heroine's family used her for their own purposes, without thinking about her feelings. The boy who was next to her was silent, but it seemed that he deeply regretted her situation, understanding how hard it was for her. The heroine told the prince about how she had been treated at home, how she had run away from her family. She did not mention her punishment because she knew such details might shock the young boy. Although her words were simple, he seemed ready to console her. Suddenly, the heroine remembered her brooch, which was very important to her. She was very worried not knowing what had happened to her, and her heart was filled with anxiety and worry. She began to apologize, explaining that her brooch had been taken, although she had carefully hidden it for safekeeping. Her agitation grew as she realized how much the item meant to her. However, soon suspicious events began to appear in the house. When a thief was discovered, all the maid's things were checked, and in the end, Baron Jefferson took the brooch. The heroine assumed that her brooch was now in Sarahasa. The boy couldn't understand why this situation had happened, but the heroine explained that it was quite logical. The brooch was very expensive, and that's why it was taken away so carefully. The main character hoped that the boy's parents would not be angry with him for giving her the thing. She was worried that it could affect his fate. The girl began to apologize to him, worried that she would lose his trust. She hid the object under the mattress, feeling extremely pathetic and helpless at that moment. At that moment, hurt and scared, she burst into tears in front of him. But the boy, like several years ago, calmly wiped away her tears, providing support without unnecessary words. After that, the girl thanked the boy and smiled, calming down a little. In response, the guy said the word boomerang, but she did not quite understand his intentions. She couldn't understand what exactly he meant by the brooch and the boomerang. She tried to grasp the meaning, but her thoughts were confused by this incomprehensible word. He continued and said the word smelt, but again she couldn't figure out what the guy meant by that. She couldn't figure out what he wanted or what he was thinking. Then the girl suddenly realized that the boy probably wanted to talk to Sir Jorge in person and return the brooch. This was an unexpected discovery for her, but she was still confused. She knew that Sir Jorge was not such a simple man as to carry out an order only at the request of a boy. However, he looked confident, as if he knew that he could achieve his goal. The girl asked him again not to ask about it, assuring him that it was not worth her efforts and would not bring the desired result. She did not want him to get into trouble. Suddenly, the guy, without saying a word, took her hand and said the word sparrow. This made her think, because his actions were becoming more and more strange and mysterious. She thought that maybe everything was right, and that Sir Jorge might not be as dangerous as she thought. Maybe everything wasn't as complicated as it seemed at first glance. But then came another prince, and at that moment, everything changed. Suddenly, the boy was in danger, and the prince might hate him and his parents. The answer was as sure as a unicorn. It meant that everything would be fine. The guy seemed to be absolutely sure of what he was saying. His words sounded so confident that the girl believed him, not doubting the future. She agreed with him, but asked him to remember one important rule. Do not return the brooch. She did not think it was necessary, but she herself could not understand why. It was strange in front of the guy because he himself gave her the brooch. An interesting thought suddenly appeared in her head, which could possibly change everything in their further actions. The lady decided to ask a strange question. Could she be taken into Mikhail's house as a servant? She decided to take such a step, hoping that everything would work out as it should. She decided to work as a maid in his house, because everything was starting to come together as she hoped. There was no longer any doubt in her mind about the correctness of her decision. But the brooch remained important evidence. The guy was nervous, worried, and silent. This only confirmed that there was something important in this item. Adriana said that she found the brooch in the forest because he had lost it. She wanted to return it to its owner because she understood how important it was to him. If a guy loses his things so carelessly, it could be a sign of his high status. Perhaps even the prince himself would not attach importance to some servant and would allow her to leave without consequences. She decided to ask the guy if it was okay to do so. This question was an important step, and she waited for his answer, deciding what to do next. He remained silent despite her presence. He did not say a word, but those around him began to persuade him, trying to change his decision. She explained that although she was not a professional, she was doing a good job. Moreover, she was sure that she would learn quickly and would not create unnecessary problems. Suddenly, he smiled unexpectedly and said the word grapes. The lady did not immediately understand why he said this and was somewhat puzzled by his remark. Perhaps he did agree, and her gratitude was expressed in a warm, tight embrace. She felt that he had accepted her words after all. She could not help but add that she sincerely thanked him for his help. He had given her considerable support, for which she was deeply grateful. Sir Jorge suddenly appeared, and without asking her any questions, asked her what she was doing there. His gaze was wary, and he was clearly displeased about something. His face contorted with anger, and he said sharply that she was not the type to touch him freely. He demanded that she back off immediately. In the book, his reputation was far from impeccable. He remained loyal to only one person, the emperor, and did not tolerate outside interference. He said that he had been looking for His Highness for a long time, and added that if he was looking for privacy, it would have been worthwhile to inform him about it in advance. He was ready to accompany him to any place. However, the boy only responded with the words, "thin ice." Sir Jorge did not know how to properly respond to this strange remark and was confused. The translation of her words was simple. It was useless. Sir Jorge asked again what she had said and seemed a little frightened by her certainty. The lady, noticing his reaction, hastened to say that it had simply seemed that way to her and would not insist on it any longer. He looked at her carefully and suspiciously, as if he didn't believe what was happening. His gaze was sharp and full of doubts because the situation was not easy. Suddenly, the lady decided to explain to him, telling him that for better understanding, he should imagine himself walking on thin ice, and of course, he would inevitably fall through. He could not immediately understand what she meant, and then the lady clarified that even if His Highness told him where to go, it always led to strange places. Now he realized that the prince's words had a permanent meaning, but he still had doubts that the girl had not made all this up, and he continued to look for confirmation. Suddenly, the young man pointed his hand at the girl again and said the word Triana. This meant that she was right, and his words were not wrong. However, Sir Jorge could not believe what he heard because it sounded completely unbelievable. He could not accept the idea that such a thing could actually happen. Adriana was completely confused and did not understand what the young man was talking about. Everything that was happening left her perplexed, and she did not know what exactly was meant. Suddenly, Mikkel uttered a short word, thorn. It was a kind of signal, a warning for Sir Jorge to be careful, because everything could be dangerous. It was an analogy reminiscent of a flower with thorns, outwardly attractive, but can cause pain when touched. Just like in their current situation, one must be vigilant. Understanding the meaning of what was said, the knight abruptly threw away his sword, realizing that he should stop further actions and that the situation really required caution. A moment later, he took the girl by the hands, looking at her with gratitude, and addressed her as Miss Adriana Woods. He began to express his gratitude. He begged her to stay with Prince Mikhail because she was the first to understand what the prince was saying. It was extremely important, and he could not miss it. After all, she was the first one who really understood what every word of the prince meant, and this became a decisive moment for their further steps. No one had ever achieved this before, and it surprised even him. The girl didn't expect something like this to happen to her. He added that she shouldn't worry about the difficult work. All she had to do was pay attention to what His Highness said. If she was around, everything would be much easier. This was a real dilemma for the heroine's head. She understands that if she stays close, she will end up in the company of the future tyrant, but she is needed by both the prince and the knight. She couldn't accept the offer right away. Mikhail was a kind and peaceful boy who didn't even show signs of cruelty, but her decision wasn't final yet. However, in the future he could become a cruel tyrant, ready to do anything for power. She did not want to be part of that. And suddenly, as if in response to her thoughts, her name rang out. It wasn't a normal call. He seemed to have something important to say. He wasn't the soft and docile boy she was used to. It surprised her. Besides, he was not the gentleman who needed her help. And then again, as if sensing her doubts, the young man said something else, making her think. The word sounded like a latch, and it seemed as if he was smiling. At that moment she remembered everything. How she, finding herself at the door, saw him in front of her for the first time. He offered her his hand, helping her out of the forest. At that moment she realized that her fate had long been tied to this man. The heroine's fate was intertwined with his. Even before she realized it, everything happened as if they were connected, even before they met. The next morning, the girl woke up and couldn't understand where she was. Everything seemed so strange and new that her thoughts couldn't immediately come into order. Suddenly, it occurred to her that she had agreed to such working conditions. Memories flashed through her mind, and she realized that she could no longer go back. She promised herself that no matter what job she did, she would stay in this castle, perhaps as a servant or in some other position. But it was only the next morning that she realized the full gravity of her actions. She could not believe that she had agreed to such conditions so easily. She felt like she was out of her mind and didn't understand how she could have agreed to this. It was a strange feeling, like she had lost her common sense. Suddenly, someone turned to her and asked if she was okay, if anything hurt. She couldn't understand where such attention and care was coming from. This was completely new to her. No one had ever treated her like this before, and she found it hard to take the attention seriously. Suddenly, she saw a beautiful girl standing next to her, who turned out to be a maid. Her attention was immediately drawn to this figure, although she had hardly noticed it before. The woman carefully checked the temperature, noting that the girl most likely did not have a fever. She understood perfectly well that the main character had spent time in the garden until late in the evening. This could be the reason for her condition, because it was probably not easy for her. Then she asked if the main character would be having breakfast, to which she was told that she would be there soon. The people around knew that the woman had to communicate this as quickly as possible to avoid unnecessary fuss. However, the woman immediately said that there was no need to worry. She confidently added that she would bring everything she needed herself and would not force the heroine to do such things. This should have been comfortable for her. The main character felt that Sir Jorge was not going to force her to perform the duties of an ordinary servant. Perhaps this was due to the fact that he said that only she could understand the prince, what was his specialty. As she watched everything that was happening, she realized that it would be impossible to refuse his offers or requests. Even if she tried, she could not disobey, because it would be against her will. Until now, no one could understand what exactly he was trying to say. Nikolai remained a mystery to everyone, and his words made no sense. It was obvious that he was hiding many secrets. Nicholas was a relative of the emperor, who was raised as a puppet. His parents had long since passed away, leaving him in the hands of those who decided his fate, which led to his current state. The emperor had never been interested in little Mikhail's life. Since childhood, he had never met a person who could understand him, and his hatred only grew with each passing day. The only person he could trust with his thoughts was his faithful assistant. Now the girl began to understand why the guy went crazy after his death. In any case, the girl was officially employed as a servant in the prince's palace. This allowed her to get a job that was more profitable than working in the baron's house. Here she could earn much more than in the baron's house. Mikhail, moreover, began to speak much earlier than could have been expected. And after the coronation, he began to speak even better. There were only a few years left to hold out. It was unlikely that the prince would continue to speak so badly for long. Another 4 or 5 years at most, and he would improve. She decided that she would save her salary. When she left the palace, she would immediately open her own restaurant because it was difficult to get into the kitchen being next to it. The maids asked the girl if she would like to have breakfast in her room or in bed. This surprised her, as this had never happened before, and she was curious. The maid suggested that the girl eat in bed, since it would be much more comfortable and pleasant than sitting at the table. She is sure that this is the best solution. Right in front of the girl, a multitude of beautiful and appetizing dishes were laid out, which not only pleased the eye, but also awakened the appetite. Their diversity immediately attracted attention. Despite such an abundance of food, the girl began to salivate. She couldn't help but admire how delicious everything looked, but it was hard to resist. The girl noticed that the cooks most likely did not know her preferences, so they decided to cook everything. This meant that she could choose something to her taste. Remembering the kitchen, the lady couldn't help but worry about how Sophia and the other maids were feeling. It was probably because of her that all the commotion was happening, and she felt responsible for it. She said that she loved fruits, white bread, and pies, and also asked to tell them to prepare a variety of dishes every morning. This was her small wish. As the maid was about to leave to convey her request, the girl asked for some more fresh milk, confident that it would also be a good addition to breakfast. The main character considered this request quite reasonable and even justified. There is never too much fresh milk, especially in the morning, when you want something healthy. Suddenly, while the girl was thinking, she noticed Sir Jorge in her bedroom. He looked pleased to see that she had not yet run away. His face expressed confidence, but she had no choice. Even if she tried to escape, Sir Jorge would personally turn the entire empire upside down to find her. He was too powerful for her to escape. The boy was glad that she understood his words, and with a light expression on his face, he handed her an envelope in which he hoped she would see important documents. When she opened the envelope, she found a contract for a servant. But it was not what she thought. The contents were unexpected and made her think. As Adriana Woods read the contract, she realized that she had enormous responsibilities. Among them, there was only one page concerning the imperial palace. However, the amount was 10 times more than what she received from Sir Jorge. That is why she immediately decided to sign the documents. But suddenly, she felt a strange uneasiness. Doubts began to arise in her head, and she decided to pull herself together because everything seemed extremely suspicious. The question of who she would be here, which was not giving her peace, she decided to ask. The guy she had pinned her hopes on realized that she was not as naive as she seemed. His view of her changed when he realized her determination and resourcefulness. Adriana expected an honest answer. She did not understand what role she would play in this new world, and why she should obey the orders of maids who were alien to her. He replied that she would be nobody. This statement greatly angered the girl because she expected a completely different attitude from him. His words fell on her like a bolt from the blue. Jorge, hearing her indignation, repeated that she would remain a nobody. He did not know how else to explain it, but the certainty in his words was obvious, and she felt that there was something more hidden there. The lady was furious. She could not understand what duties she had to perform and what it all meant for her future. It did not fit in her head, and it made her angry to the limit. Jorge added that with her background, she couldn't get into the palace. Moreover, she wasn't even fit to be a simple pretend servant, which humiliated her even more. Adriana already knew about it, but it was Baron Jefferson who organized this spectacle, so that she would understand how far her position was from what she wanted. And even more, her place here was in question. Adriana always dreamed of being a maid, but in her eyes, it was more than just a job. She wanted to be close to Prince Mikhail, to help him and support him in everything he did. However, it was not that simple. Prince Mikhail did not consider her role limited to that of a servant. His views on the girl's position surprised her more than she expected. To make matters worse, Everyone in the palace, except the prince himself, considered her too low for such a role. They saw her as an idiot, incapable of putting two words together. What she heard disappointed the girl. She could not understand why his opinions and statements were perceived as ridiculous because he was simply used to expressing thoughts differently. It made her wonder why everyone was so afraid of the prince. Even Baron Jefferson trembled at the rumors that mentioned his name, which seemed strange to her. However, Sir Jorge explained to her that Baron Jefferson was an ordinary country boy who had arrived in the capital only 6 months ago. His words could not be authoritative. It was not customary to speak out loud about the fact that no one could fully understand Prince Mikhail. It concerned the reputation of the imperial family, and such discussions could cause harm. People only knew that the prince was not very smart, which was always the subject of rumors. At this time, Adriana began to understand how difficult it was for him in this world. Apparently, the emperor was very worried about the rumors concerning the prince. He tried to hide the fact that Mikhail was not thinking clearly, but everyone understood that these conversations had already become public. Later, when Mikhail ascends to the throne, there will be no difficulty due to the fact that as a child he could not express his thoughts properly. Adriana realized that her purpose is her life's mission. From now on, her task is to convey to everyone that Emperor Mikhail is actually very smart. After all, only she could do it. A task of such magnitude should not be entrusted to anyone, not even a maid, because she had to be that link. So she will decide to remain unnoticed. She will become just a worker who came here from Sir Jefferson's house, and her role will remain modest. If she understood everything Jorge asked her to sign the necessary papers, this was an important step in the further process that would determine her future fate. But the lady objected, saying that in the palace there were not only servants but also ladies-in-waiting, as well as ordinary workers, and her position should be higher. The legend Sir Jefferson had concocted might have enabled her to become a servant, but it was clearly not enough to be a lady-in-waiting. Besides, to work in the palace, she had to wait until she came of age, and she knew there was still a lot of time left until that moment. However, there were other ways. Jorge even considered making her the emperor's bride, which would have opened up new prospects for her. Adriana could not understand why her brother could not marry before he ascended the throne. This rule remained a mystery to her, defying explanation. Then Sir Jorge explained to her that such young couples often died very early. It had become a common situation, and almost always this was how events unfolded in their world. Adriana began to realize that Sir Jorge was not a good man. Despite his explanations, he had merely suggested this idea, although he felt that others would perceive it as cruelty. Jorge immediately realized that this was the right decision, because a bride who can transform the prince becomes an important figure. However, her life will now be mainly connected with the palace. The habit of communicating with the crown prince gradually influenced Adriana. She began to subconsciously adopt his manner of speech and expression, which was a natural process for her. Jorge was surprised to hear Adriana's strange statement and asked what she had just said. She wasted no time in replying that the word unicorn in butler language meant impossible. Adriana's words made Jorge think. The guy realized that there were many hidden meanings in their communication that had just become obvious to him, and he felt a new depth. He tried to object, but he didn't have time to finish. It was on this day that Sarah Jorge swore to give his life to protect her. She begged to become Prince Kelly's bride, but had to stop him. She put on a luxurious dress that amazed everyone with its beauty. In this outfit, she looked simply stunning, but in her soul, it caused conflicting feelings. The problem was that she couldn't get used to such clothes. Her poor lifestyle didn't allow her to wear such clothes, and she felt uncomfortable in this splendor. The assistant immediately ran up to her, noticing her confusion. She asked if everything was okay, and added that it would be better to call the maid to help hold the skirt in the right position. Adriana calmly replied that nothing terrible had happened. After all, in her opinion, there was no one around, and it didn't matter at all. especially since no one was waiting for her here. The assistant asked doubtfully if it was possible to choose something simpler, but the maid replied that Sir Jorge wanted her to dress according to her status and follow strict instructions. The main character could not understand why so much attention was paid to her. She did not understand why she had to explain all her actions so carefully, because she had no intention of violating the order. Adriana thought for a long time, and finally realized that her profession was a translator. Although she still could not express herself clearly, she understood that she had to study and master new skills. Despite the fact that she was uncomfortable, the girl had to get used to her new life. The maid, noticing her confusion, asked if she should bring her some of the dessert. Adriana agreed to the offer. She was a little nervous because she had to share her thoughts and experiences with other people. She was not sure how she would cope with it. Sir Jorge suddenly appeared and asked if everything was ready. His calmness somewhat reassured the girl, and she answered in the affirmative. Then they headed into the corridor. On the way, she asked Sir Jorge if he could personally translate for people like her, but he did not understand what she was talking about. She noticed his confusion, but did not continue the conversation. She explained that without him, his charges were left unprotected. He was the only one who could provide security when they arrived together, and she feared for their safety. The girl said that the prince was now in danger. Hearing these words, Sir Jorge confidently replied that no one would dare to harm the young heir. Adriana didn't understand why everything was so strange. Then Sir Jorge explained that if anyone dared to threaten the prince, the one found guilty could be appointed as a replacement. Sir Jorge said that such a threat would have serious consequences. If someone decided to harm the prince, the consequences would be so serious that it would not go unpunished. If Prince L had been killed without the emperor's order, someone would have had to take his place. However, anyone who claimed this role would have been eliminated immediately. In the eyes of others, L looked like a carefree and foolish man who was unlikely to ever become an emperor. Therefore, they were not particularly worried about his fate. It would be much more profitable to leave him alone. But if the lady works decently, then perhaps something will change in his position, and the situation will become different. Then the girl began to worry because she realized that perhaps she shouldn't even work well. She could only translate the prince's words for Sir Jorge, but he explained that from the moment the girl appeared, Prince Michael had been under threat, and now his life was at greater risk. However, he could not abandon him. The question that remained in the main character's mind was simple. Why can't he leave the prince? It was unclear, but the answer was never given. More questions appeared in her head. Of course, it was a pity that the prince was treated like a fool, but on the other hand, it would have been better if he had simply fled the threat of death before he was ready for it. He didn't seem to give a clear answer to her questions, and after she heard his words, there was even more uncertainty. He only asked her to follow him and be quiet. Prince Mikhail probably has something in mind already. He has always been like that, and if it is true, he will be glad, because he does not like to do anything boring or obligatory. The girl was very surprised. The prince's schedule should have included lessons, and she did not expect that he was already planning something. This added anxiety to her thoughts. However, this did not seem important to Jorge. He was willing to ignore such details, considering them unimportant compared to more important matters that required attention. He advised the girl not to worry. She should not expect the prince to inform her of his schedule every day or to adjust to her demands. But after his words, Adriana couldn't understand how she would be able to find him. If any need arose, she didn't know how to act in such a situation. The knight suddenly asked her about time. He wondered if she thought that time was wasted, only on talking and silence, or if it should be used more effectively. If you think about it, it was like being awake, not sleeping. She had to adjust to the prince's schedule, so she would always be ready to help at a moment's notice. Now the girl understood what they were talking about. Jorge wanted her to be there all the time, to keep an eye on everything, not missing a single detail, ready to intervene at any moment. Jorge also answered her question about why he couldn't leave the prince. He explained that Mikhail was upset. No one understood him. He cried at night, hiding his feelings. What she heard shocked the girl greatly. She realized that the boy she met had a deep moral trauma. It was clear from his behavior and facial expression. Now before her was the future tyrant, the man who would walk through seas of blood, executing many people. And it was he who on these nights quietly cried into his pillow. She decided to try with all her might to change his fate. After all, only she could be his voice, help him become better, and avoid a terrible fate. She made a promise to herself to change the world. She vowed that she would do everything in her power to make Mickey's life and her own life far better than they could have been. Suddenly, she was invited into the hall, and she became a little worried. Expecting something important, she headed to the place where the one who could change her life was waiting for her. It was the strict teacher, Professor Schuber. She immediately asked if this was Adriana Woods, and the girl felt her heart skip a beat. She was told that there would be 2 people present at the lesson, and this surprised the girl very much. She had never studied at the academy and had not prepared for classes, but she knew how to read. Once in the classroom, Adriana realized that she would be studying with Mikhail. This was unexpected for her because she did not expect her life to change so quickly. The young lady was shocked by what was happening. Professor Schuber was not going to waste time on her getting used to it. She sternly warned that if Adriana did not listen to the lesson, she would ask her to leave. The girl had no choice, although she was well aware that this would happen. Therefore, she had to try to minimize her mistakes so as not to arouse suspicion. Suddenly, the crown prince turned to Adriana. It seemed he wanted to say something, but at the moment of his gesture, the girl felt a slight anxiety and anticipation. Suddenly, the prince said the word slippers. It was a sign that he was asking her to relax and not worry so much, which seemed sweet and unusual for him. The gesture meant that the prince wanted her not to worry, and although it was strange, Adriana hoped that her presence could influence his character. Meanwhile, the professor explained that they would have textbooks in front of them that they would have to write themselves. This was to be an important part of their future education. She gave the command to open these books. They were de Brent's history books, which were to be studied, but their structure itself was unusual and required special attention. But as it turned out, it was not an ordinary book at all. In their hands was a notebook in which they had to write down everything they learned in class. The notebook was an important part of their learning process. Here they had to write down everything they learned, creating a kind of personal notes for future study. Then one of the students asked if they would study only history. The professor replied that of course there would be many subjects, and everyone would make their own contribution. Although the teaching was supposed to be varied, it so happened that the professor agreed to teach them history, politics, and mathematics, considering these topics to be the main ones. 3 subjects were enough to start with, and Adriana knew she had a lot of work ahead of her, but she was ready to overcome any difficulties on the path to knowledge. The lesson began, but its content was simply terrible. The unclear and complex topics made the girl feel insecure and angry because she could not understand. She couldn't understand a single sentence. This frustrated her, but despite this, she continued to try to concentrate so as not to appear weak in front of the professor. The professor asked the students to write down at least those parts that they could understand. For Adriana, this became another challenge, to do at least a little from the entire lesson. The main character, Adriana Woods, couldn't understand what was being said. She replied that she didn't understand anything at all, and besides, her memory was failing her at that moment. They then decided to study His Highness's notes. This decision seemed logical, since they could contain the necessary information that could clarify everything that happened. However, the notebook was not as useful as expected. This greatly disappointed the professor of the academy, who could not believe that his subjects were being taken so superficially. The professor suggested that perhaps they were simply not used to taking notes. He thought they should try the question and answer method to better retain the information. Suddenly, Mikhail, as if in response, said the word plum. This was his special confirmation, because His Highness had always loved this fruit, and this was a kind of approval. This was a real relief for the professor. He was delighted and suggested continuing the lessons. Taking a pointer, he began to explain in detail the history of the Dobron Empire. The professor explained in detail how the continent was repeatedly divided into several countries. The main character listening to all this felt that she did not understand anything because she had a poor memory for faces and events. The professor also explained that the territories of these countries were very small. Some of them resembled small settlements in area, but despite this, they declared themselves separate states. The emperor came from a small country that no one really noticed. It was as small as many others hidden on the map of the continent. The country was so small that its capital was much larger, raising questions about dividing the continent into such tiny states. The lady thought about it, but she didn't know what to say. It seemed to her that it all made sense because these strange and small states existed before the empire was created. At that moment, the boy sitting next to me suddenly said the word ankylosis. His voice was quiet but clear, and the word was clearly out of context. This surprised the girl because she could not immediately understand what he meant. The word sounded strange and did not sound like anything familiar that she could associate with it. The professor, trying to figure it out, asked him what he meant by that word, but she couldn't understand him because that word didn't exist in the language she knew. The boy kept repeating the word without stopping, but it all remained incomprehensible to her. Each repetition only confused her without providing the necessary explanation. Then the professor became very angry. She had hoped that with the help of the young lady, she would be able to establish contact with His Highness. But this did not happen, and she became very unpleasant. Although Adriana had understood something before, now her thoughts were completely confused. She felt broken, not knowing what was happening. The professor, noticing her sadness, decided to intervene. At this time, the boy turned to Adriana. The professor added that she hoped they would not miss their chance and that the stalking teacher would not be the reason for their failure. This was important for her students, and she hoped that the situation would not get out of control. Everything that was happening seemed very complicated and even a little confusing. Adriana couldn't figure out what exactly had gone wrong. Her feelings were mixed, and she didn't know how to proceed. The situation seemed to be getting too tense. Adriana decided to ask again what this word meant. She was well aware that she had not understood it the first time, and she wanted to clarify for herself what exactly the interlocutor meant. This was an important point for her, so as not to make a mistake. The boy wanted to say something, but his thoughts suddenly became confused, and he didn't know how to start the conversation. He seemed a little confused, unsure of how to continue. Adriana began to worry that she might have offended him, and immediately tried to correct the situation. She quickly said that the problem was not with him, so that he would not worry. This worry overwhelmed her, and she did not want him to feel awkward. Suddenly, a new figure appeared in the room, and Adriana noticed it. Someone entered, interrupting their moment of conversation. It was an unexpected turn, and she did not have time to understand who exactly appeared. Sir Jorge entered the room. He seemed very agitated, and noticing the tense atmosphere, asked what had happened. He clearly felt that something was wrong and wanted to get to the bottom of the situation. Adriana started to apologize, but Jorge immediately calmed her down, saying that there was no need to apologize. He was sure that it was nothing serious and that the problem could be solved. He didn't want her to worry unnecessarily. Sir Jorge wanted to understand what the real problem was. He suggested that perhaps Adriana had simply lost the ability to do something, and that could be the cause of her condition. She replied that she had no powers. The prince had only said, "Ankelo you," and she had no idea what that meant. Her answer was one of complete bewilderment. The guy probably made up the word himself, and his mysterious expression left her at a loss. It was unlikely that she had ever heard anything like it. Greatly surprised by her answer, the prince asked her if she knew the meaning of the word. He clearly expected a different understanding, but her answer only confirmed her ignorance. The young lady calmly replied that she had never heard that word before, and it was clear from her face that she did not understand what was being talked about. Jorge's mind finally clicked, and he began to pay closer attention to her answers. He might realize that something was wrong with what he was hearing. He decided to ask her if she had ever been to a zoo, to which she replied that she had not. This only fueled his curiosity, and he continued asking questions. She had heard about the zoo in the capital, but she thought it was too expensive to get there, and she didn't have the time. But the idea itself still attracted her attention. Jorge explained that the ankylos was an overseas animal that did not exist in the empire. He was surprised to see that she did not know this, which seemed logical. It wouldn't be surprising for her not to know about this animal. But how could the prince know about it? However, the knight had an answer to this question, and he was ready to voice it. They will stay in the palace for about a month, after which they will be sent back to the zoo. This decision was made, not without the participation of the prince, who was very interested. He remembered how much this had interested His Highness. His attention had been drawn to this unusual animal, and he had long wanted to know more about it. It was difficult for the girl to understand because she could not imagine how different their worlds were. What was familiar to him, she could barely comprehend. The difference in their situations was too great, and if it was not reduced, such situations could be repeated. She needed to continue her training. If she does not take these steps, her level of assistance will remain too low. Her abilities and knowledge will be limited, which will prevent her from effectively coping with difficulties. Then Sir Jorge took out his notebook. Even though the drawings weren't the most accurate, at least some of the features were on the paper, which allowed one to understand something. He explained that this was the very animal the young prince had spoken of. In reality, its coloring was much brighter, and its mouth more frightening than the drawing showed. Having carefully studied the picture, the girl understood what animal was being discussed. Everything fell into place in her head, and now she could understand what was hidden behind the words. The professor asking the question was talking about the many small states that had existed before. This made the girl think, and she tried to remember why it was so. If you look at the back of an ankylosaurus, you will notice many bulges. These features resemble mountain ranges, which add massiveness and unusualness to the animal. Debrant was rich in varied landscapes. Although the city was quite large, the nature of its surroundings was mountainous, where the girl grew up accustomed to such landscapes. Sir Jorge agreed with the girl. He admitted that she was right. Before the roads were built to transport goods between countries, nothing was organized. From this, Sir Jorge knew that this was what she meant. He realized that her words reflected the exact state of affairs, and that this was what she had been thinking about. In the empire, the territory varied greatly depending on the region. So there used to be many small states. This explained a lot, and Sir Jorge understood the need for an apology. She replied that she apologized for her failures in fulfilling her duties, but this greatly surprised the knight. He knew that she was doing everything in her power, and she should not make excuses. Jorge asked her to stop talking nonsense. He saw how hard she was trying and thought she was doing a great job, but the girl thought otherwise because she had missed class. The girl believed that all this happened because of her. She burst into tears because despite the fact that His Majesty answered her question, she could not understand him and felt like a failure. She tried to explain to the teacher, but there was no point. Professor Schubert had made it clear that there was only one chance. If she left, she would never come back. This disappointed the girl even more, as she understood how much effort the assistant had put in to invite Professor Schubert. Many teachers had already refused to teach the young man. Now she couldn't figure out who would teach Mikhail. When Sir Jorge suddenly knelt down and suggested that he could take over the teaching, he offered his help. Of course, he wasn't sure that he could teach as the situation required, because his knowledge was far from deep. He couldn't help to reach the required level. However, this was temporary, until another teacher could be found. The prince replied that it would be bearable, although his answers were a bit confusing, such as strawberry. She looked at the books he had been given. When she stood in front of them, She realized they were preschool books. This was much better than Professor Schubert's words. She began to study them and found that she became very interested. The books were simple and accessible, and she could focus on their contents. The prince was doing very well with the books, but it was clear that something was bothering him. He looked a little irritated, as if something was not quite as he had expected. The lady asked him what exactly he was not happy with. The prince replied, "Paper," but his answer was incomplete, and the girl could not immediately understand what exactly he wanted to express. Sir Jorge thought that the reason was the poor quality of the paper, and that might explain his displeasure. However, the prince repeated his words without explaining exactly what he meant. He said, "Paper," again, hoping that those around him would be able to understand his problem. He was determined that this word was the key to his discontent. Suddenly, the lady realized that the prince simply did not know how to count letters. This became clear to her, and now she understood exactly what the problem with his perception was. She was absolutely certain that the boy could not read letters, and that this explained his strange remarks. He simply could not perceive the book as others did. Jorge was so furious that his desire to immediately eliminate those teachers who only pretended to teach Prince Mikhail became almost unbearable. He could not allow these people to continue their work. In the book, the knight Jorge was often described as the loyal right hand of the cruelest tyrant. However, in reality, his behavior was far from the image of a cold-blooded and decisive man who always remained calm. The lady, watching Jorge's heated attack on those who had not lived up to his expectations, asked what would happen to the prince if he did kill them. But Jorge was not interested in the opinions of those around him. He believed that no one would pay attention. However, she knew for sure that Jorge was not the kind of person who could act like that. There were many more conscious values in his soul than it might seem at first glance. He was deeply condemned by himself because he admitted his guilt. He believed that it was his carelessness and weakness in decisions that were the reason why Prince Michael never learned to read and write. Jorge felt like an idiot following the emperor's orders without thinking. He was convinced that this was the only way, and that this was the only way to achieve success, not realizing that his actions could cause more harm than good. It didn't even occur to him that his own view of things might be wrong. Jorge thought Prince Mikhail could learn to read and write, but he missed the importance of the human approach to learning. Suddenly, Prince Mikhail himself approached the crying Jorge. His presence seemed to bring some clarity to this confusing situation, because Mikhail was much wiser than many could think. The prince smiled, which was an unexpected and even instructive gesture for Jorge. He said that sunlight always illuminates the darkness, and that nothing is ever completely bad. The girl next to him assured him that the prince was truly confident that everything would be fine, and that each of them would cope with their difficulties. Her confidence was infectious. These words brought him real joy, and he decided that he would now take up teaching. He was determined to teach them the alphabet as soon as possible. He quickly wiped the tears from his face and, eager to act, quickly set to work. His desire to teach the alphabet was strong, and he was ready to begin immediately. She also asked if the knight would mind if she taught Prince Mikhail to read herself. Her request was modest, but very important for the boy's future. As soon as the girl received permission to teach the little emperor, she began teaching him with enthusiasm. Her whole focus was on teaching him the alphabet. She carefully wrote out all the letters, and fortunately, he quickly mastered the alphabet. Every day his progress became more and more obvious, and she was very pleased. She hadn't expected such rapid progress. Seeing him learn the alphabet in just one day, she began to wonder if he was pretending not to be able to speak. And so, after some time, he had already written his first essay. In it, he talked about how he ate a plum, and despite the simplicity of the topic, his thoughts were sincere. It didn't matter what he said next. The main character even asked him to rewrite the sentence, and the result remained the same. However, she understood his intention. In the entire empire, there were only two people who supported Mikhail, our heroine and Sir Jorge. Everyone else was only happy when he seemed like a fool. However, the heroine was sure that in a few years, Mikhail would learn to speak like a normal person. She knew that if she continued to support him, it would probably speed up the process. She also announced that classes were over for the day because they had worked so hard. The heroine noted that she would talk to Aram Jorge to invite another teacher. After all, she couldn't teach him everything since she didn't know enough for that. It was clear from his expression that this news did not make him very happy. He became very sad, but the girl confidently added that she would be present at all classes, and he should not worry. The boy, despite his sadness, asked her to swear on her name. With a smile on her face, she gave the oath, assuring that everything would be as they had agreed. To seal their pact, he suggested shaking hands, pinky-fingered. It was a gesture that symbolized their agreement and trust in each other. They completed all the agreements, but there was one important duty left for the heroine. She had to stay with the boy while he was awake and take care of him. Adriana Woods signed a contract with Sir Jorge, and this decision opened new horizons for her. She understood that this was a step that would change her life. Hearing this, the boy who was nearby was very happy. His face lit up with joy, and he felt relief fill his heart. The next moment he ran up and hugged the girl. He missed her presence very much, and he really enjoyed her company, feeling safe with her. His embrace was so tight that Adriana couldn't even breathe. The boy, as if not noticing her excitement, continued to hold her in his arms. He wanted her to be with him always, close by. However, the girl warned him that this was probably impossible, since she did not know how long people could be close. The young man, despite his youth, suggested an unusual way to be together, in a coffin. His words about death struck Adriana because he was only 10 years old, and such thoughts were inappropriate. However, it seemed he hadn't expected his words to cause such a reaction. The boy just stared at her silently, unable to comprehend how this had affected the girl. The next class, the same teacher came as before. However, Adriana noticed that she seemed to be getting a little bolder. This made her feel anxious. She nervously greeted the teacher, who in response ordered her to open a new textbook. Adriana realized that another important step in their education awaited them. She said that she had heard that His Highness could now read, and mentioned that they had had some difficulty communicating. The boy had once again uttered strange words, particularly gravel. This meant that he had agreed. The professor, before starting the training, turned to Miss Wood with a request. She asked to carefully follow the professor's lessons and listen attentively to every moment. This surprised the main character because she didn't have to do anything like that. The Highness understood everything perfectly well, and her role was limited to just sitting next to him and translating. However, the professor thought otherwise. Even if the boy understood everything, if the lady could not correctly interpret his thoughts, she would not be able to accurately convey his feelings and thoughts. This meant that despite Mikhail's knowledge, Ms. Wood would not be able to do her job unless she understood what was going on in the conversation. The girl smiled and promised to do her best because that was true. After the lesson, she could not understand anything, and everything she had heard seemed to have evaporated from her head. The lesson ended late, and it seemed to her that she did not have time to understand every word. She was very upset, eager to get to her bedroom to be alone and recuperate after a stressful day. Suddenly, Sir Jorge said that she had worked very well today. However, the heroine did not share this opinion because her work was simply part of her duties. She decided to ask for separate lessons, but the gentleman did not understand her request, not realizing that she wanted to work on herself and study something outside of the general classes. The lady explained that she wanted to take extra lessons to learn on her own. She felt as if she could influence the prince's education. He replied that it would not be difficult to find another teacher for this, but there was one point that he considered important. People should always be close to the prince. Suddenly, he had a great idea, an entrance ticket to a library that was always open. The lights were always on, and she could come in any time to read books. She was a little confused and didn't know how to respond to his proposal. Thoughts filled her, and she sank into thought, not quite sure of her decision. He told her that the library had many more books than her office. The girl could easily find suitable materials. Hearing this, she relaxed and agreed. One of the subjects taught to the prince was the art of ball control. The teacher asked him to make his movements wider, as there were many shortcomings in his technique. After the young man fulfilled the teacher's request, the teacher praised him for his efforts and told him to repeat the exercise 10 more times to improve his technique. At this time, the main character, standing aside, watched the young man's hard work. She saw how he tirelessly trained, despite his fatigue. After several intense swings of the sword, the young man was very exhausted, and barely holding back his strength, he continued training, fixated on one point in the air. The teacher, watching this, could not understand why he had not thought of teaching the prince how to handle a ball earlier. After all, Mikkel clearly could not sit quietly in the library. The situation was quite understandable. Jorge knew his father, who was exactly the same. He could not sit still and always sought action. However, the main character understood that Mikkel realized that it was impossible to rule the whole world with just one sword, and that more was needed to achieve success. Thanks to the techniques taught to him by Sir Jorge, Mikkel will one day be able to destroy many people. These lessons will give him not only strength, but also determination. The training, despite its intensity, left the boy very tired. He went to bed earlier than usual, completely exhausted, but satisfied with what he had accomplished. When the girl saw that he had fallen asleep, she decided that now was the time to go to the library. She knew that her time now belonged to knowledge. Sir Jorge, noticing her intentions, wished her luck. He understood that for her, this was not just a visit to the library, but a chance to develop and be useful. 3 months had passed since Adriana had become Mikkel's companion. Her role had changed, and she was increasingly choosing to devote herself to books rather than to restless activities. During this period, she decided for herself that she was no one important, just the prince's translator. However, for her, this was much more significant than it seemed. Even though those around her didn't understand the meaning of the word, every time she called herself, that it seemed like she was clearly aware of her role in the mansion. In order to cope with the work, she needed to learn more about makeup. But it was not that simple. Mikkel's abilities always surprised Professor Schubert. When Mikkel explained something, Adriana could not always understand what exactly he meant. Fortunately, the professor soon realized the reason for her confusion. Despite all the difficulties, Adriana continued her studies, although at times she wanted to give up everything and leave. But fortunately, she was able to overcome this and continue working. She was content to study on her own, because if she had had a mentor, her funds would have quickly run out. Working on her own initiative was much more profitable. Soon, she began to think about politics and planned to study it seriously, even if it meant sleepless nights. She was ready to do anything to succeed. Suddenly, she heard a voice coming very close. It interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find out who was calling her. She saw Mikkel standing in front of her with a smile on his face, and it seemed like he wanted to tell her something. She did not immediately understand what had happened, and as always, she turned to him, using a phrase from their usual communication, which he knew very well from her manner of communication. She immediately asked what he was doing there, because it was clear that he needed to hurry and return to his bedroom, where he was supposed to be resting. But the boy only responded by saying the name Orchid, which seemed to mean that he simply missed her and wanted to see her as soon as possible. Adriana replied that if he wanted to see her, he should wait until the morning, since she never told him what she was doing in the library. The boy answered again, saying the name Orchid, which again meant that he missed her very much, but they would only be able to meet when the morning came. She couldn't understand where the guards were looking, because instead of watching the boy and not allowing him to leave the bedroom, they did not interfere with her studies. How could he have slipped past such strict security? She couldn't understand how it was possible that no one had noticed his way to the library. Suddenly, the boy said that he was a wizard, and probably meant that he used magic or trickery to pass unnoticed. The lady was not satisfied with this. She took him firmly by the hand and led him home, convincing him that he should sleep until the morning, and she herself would continue her studies. Adriana couldn't understand how he managed to use this trick at such a young age. It seemed incredible because his age would not allow him to be so dexterous and cunning. She thought that maybe he had deceived them because he wanted to see her, because she could feel how he was reaching out to her. But did he have the power to change the future? Adriana believed that she could help him change his path. But with each passing day, her confidence was fading. More and more doubts remained in her heart, and hope was fading. Finally, she reached the room tired and out of breath. She apologized, asking for a little time to rest, because her breathing was ragged and her strength was exhausted. The boy stood motionless, his gaze fixed on one spot. He seemed to be absorbed in his thoughts, oblivious to time and the world around him. When the lady addressed him, he did not immediately answer. His gaze was fixed on the distance, and his answer was incomplete, as if he were absorbed in some deep thought. She asked him what was wrong, and why he was staring at the moon so intently. Perhaps there was a reason for his intense attention, but his answer was only one word. The boy spoke of the moment when they first met, and the brooch he had given her. He said that she had gotten lost, and his words were full of regret. She remembered it too late, and was stunned by how she could have forgotten. It seemed like a big deal, and she immediately started apologizing, because it was no small thing for her. But the boy smiled and said, "Rope." She didn't understand what that had to do with the future, but something in his words made her think about the difference it would make. She smiled back and realized that she just needed to be near him. Maybe if she spent a few years with him, his heart would become less cold and more open. She hoped that her actions to protect him would lead to better consequences than those that might have occurred without her intervention and care. At that moment, her only hope was herself. She decided to do everything in her power to protect Mikkel and help him grow into a decent man, despite his past. Tired after long hours in the library, she fell asleep early. She spent the entire day studying books, hoping to find answers to the questions that tormented her. Suddenly, a maid ran into the room and began to wake her up hastily. The girl was puzzled, not understanding what had happened and why she had been woken up so early. The maid told him that Mikkel had finally received an invitation to a ball that would take place in the imperial palace. This was an important event that changed many things. Confused, she learned that Mikkel had never been to an imperial ball before. She asked when it would take place, and the maid replied that it would be in 10 days. The woman clarified that they still had time to prepare. The ball, as it turned out, was an important event, and they had several days to complete all the necessary work. This meant that she would have to be a floor translator again, which made her life even more difficult. Adriana did not like the prospect of being put in that role again. She asked the maid if Sir Jorge had sent her a new schedule. However, as soon as he learned of the change, he immediately informed them. The maid assured them that they had no need to rush, and that perhaps they should calmly prepare for the ball. But something in her soul told her that this day would not be easy. At this point, the maid suggested that Adriana might like to hear about a secret method that might help her cope with the upcoming events. She leaned closer and added that she was in the same position, which brought her even closer to the heroine, creating a sense of mutual understanding. Adriana immediately understood the meaning of her words. If she maintains the same positive attitude, it will become even more difficult for her. For her simplicity and accessibility, she was loved in the house. Adriana smiled and replied that she liked Ashley very much too. The maid was sincere and simple, and this added warmth to the atmosphere of their communication. A few minutes later, a pleased Sir Jorge knocked on the door, his face beaming with joy. He asked if the girl had heard the latest news. Adriana smiled and replied that she already knew everything. She was aware of the latest events, and it made her happy that she had managed to find out in time. Jorge was delighted with the news. He was happy, and it was all thanks to Adriana. her actions, and determination. The main character felt a slight anxiety, but Sir Jorge calmly told her that all worries should be left to the adults and to focus on herself and the prince. Despite Jorge's words, Adriana was still worried. The prince didn't seem happy about what was happening. She couldn't understand how things would develop further or what he was planning. Jorge assured her that the emperor had already taken care of all aspects, including the princess's weaknesses. He added that it would soon be officially announced, and everyone would know the truth. Adriana was very scared, after which she asked Sir Jorge not to joke about this anymore. However, he restrained himself and replied that this was not a joke at all, but a real situation. She responded by stating that without her participation, the emperor would not have made such an important decision. Otherwise, Prince Michael would have found himself in an extremely awkward position, made to look like a fool. Now, with Adriana's arrival, the situation has changed. Everyone will soon find out that Prince Michael simply has an unusual style of speech, and the role at the ball will be key. She must prepare. Sir Jorge couldn't help but be glad that Kel, despite everything, had at least received some recognition. It reminded her of moments in the past when she had waited for at least a little praise from her family. The image of her picking up grass came back to her mind, thinking that maybe it was even harder for him than it was for her. He was probably going through similar feelings. There is only one reason why the prince was finally invited to the ball and allowed to go out into society. As a result, the room became more filled with intelligence than anyone expected. After she became a translator, Kel seemed to change. He became a completely different person, and now he was able to handle many tasks, which was a great achievement. The talk had obviously reached the emperor, who was now perhaps seeking to completely subjugate the prince, turning him into his puppet. The girl felt helpless, which worried her more and more. Perhaps it would be better for him if no one knew about his true abilities. Then people would see him as a serious flaw, and he would not be able to claim the throne. Adriana Woods knew that if she really wanted to stop Mikhail from becoming a cruel tyrant, she had to make every effort to ensure that his bright sprout was not destroyed from the very beginning. A feeling of sadness came over her because she had an extremely important choice before her. She understood that now all her strength must be directed to helping Mikhail successfully go through this path. Madame Flores, the dance teacher, took charge of preparing the girl for the ball. She asked her what she thought about the event, because Adriana almost fell again. Adriana apologized for her mistake, but deep down, she knew that there was no way out of this situation. She knew that she had to learn to dance. Sir Jorge said it would be much wiser for her to learn to dance. It would help her anyway, even if she didn't feel confident at the ball. Adriana replied that she could not do it, and to her surprise, the knight added that she simply did not know how to do it. That was why he hired an experienced dance tutor for her. Adriana felt that her background was so low that she couldn't even properly place her hand on her partner's shoulder. The question arose, why teach her this if she couldn't dance properly? She received an answer that it might not happen right now, but in the future she would definitely be able to dance peacefully. It sounded like a promise. Still, she agreed and put herself in a positive frame of mind. She had to be with His Highness, and besides, these were free dance lessons. When she spotted him, she knew he was incredible. She asked him if he was interested in watching her practice, and when he responded positively, it confirmed that she enjoyed it too. Mr. Jorge asked Madame Flores to pair Miss Woods and the prince. It seemed like a great idea, and soon they began to dance. She was surprised she hadn't thought of it before. They were a perfect height match, and dancing with a real partner would be much more effective. Plus, dancing with a real partner could improve their skills significantly, rather than constantly pretending to be partners, which would be less productive. However, she didn't quite understand why it was necessary. But Jorge added that it was necessary for Prince Michael, which added seriousness to everything. The emperor announced that he would introduce the prince's partner at the ball. Most likely it would be some young lady of his age, so she should prepare to dance with the prince. Adriana Woods had convinced herself many times that she shouldn't give in to that naive and angelic look of the boy. However, finding herself in an unpleasant situation again, she realized that all this would not lead to anything good. The boy, who had barely smiled before, was now beaming like never before. Adriana knew that these thoughts and reflections were of no use, and that she should just act. She decided not to waste time worrying and got down to business. To the gentle sound of the piano, she began to teach the boy to dance. However, everything did not go according to plan. She constantly stepped on his feet and apologized every time. Adriana couldn't even count how many times she stepped on his feet in half an hour. It happened so often that she didn't have time to react, and her anxiety grew. She couldn't help but ask him if his legs were okay. Adriana was worried that they might swell from such constant blows, and it would end in pain for the boy. She was worried that the boy might get upset and stop dancing, but he only quietly said one word, "tree." This answer reassured her. He did not feel pain and wanted to continue his lessons. However, when Jorge, as always, intervened and asked what was going on, Adriana, deciding not to worry him, lied. She said that the boy was in pain and did not want to continue dancing. But Sir Jorge immediately sensed the lie and asked her if she wanted to terminate the contract. His questions were direct, and his gaze was persistent, like that of an experienced man. At that moment, she realized that she had no choice but to learn to dance. So she explained that the tree meant that it didn't hurt when someone stepped on it. Even Mr. Jorge began to understand the boy's language because the word strawberry meant that the lady had answered correctly. With each of his gestures, it became clear he knew a lot, and despite a few failed attempts, she seemed to have learned to dance a little. It was a difficult test, but she became more confident with each step. But then, a second later, she stepped on the boy's foot again. The feeling of discomfort returned, but she did not give up hoping that everything would work out next time. She admitted that she could not continue because she did not want to leave bruises on the prince's legs. This worried her because she already felt responsible for his well-being. But there was no damage to the prince's body, and even the dance teacher noticed it. She added that Miss Woods should not worry because the woolen shoes would protect the prince. Sir Jorge said that if it bothered her so much, she should learn to dance as soon as possible, so as not to harm His Highness and not to bother him anymore. This broke her even more because she had planned to run away from this assignment. However, now it seemed to her that there was no escape from it, and she had to complete it. After going through such a difficult experience, she still decided that it was worth going to the library. However, at the last moment she changed her mind and did not go. The main character stated that she was too tired. Sir Jorge noticed that she was trying to tell him something, and this could not help but draw his attention to her condition. Deep down, she decided that he shouldn't be afraid because her demands were fair enough. It was a feeling that gave her confidence in her actions. She dreamed of getting back the lion brooch that had been taken from her. It was a gift that meant something to her, and she hoped she could get it back. The main character wanted the brooch back because it was a gift from the prince himself. She felt that he hoped she would wear it to the ball, which gave her confidence. The boy was unsure how to take her words. He didn't know how much he could trust her words. In response, she only said that he understood everything perfectly well. Apparently, something in this conversation did not suit him. The girl noticed this and was very worried. Her face betrayed her anxiety because his mood had clearly worsened. He asked her if she knew what the request was. She explained that it was a very valuable brooch worth a fortune and that she would never have earned it in her entire life. The brooch, she said, was the last symbol of the imperial family that belonged to His Highness before he became crown prince. It was that important. Jorge said that he got it after his father died. He noted that if a girl showed up in the capital with this brooch and said that she was from the imperial family, she would be believed. Hearing this, the girl was stunned. How could such a valuable thing end up in her possession? Perhaps the prince did not know its value when he gave it to her, but now he probably guesses. Mr. Jorge remained silent, not understanding what exactly she wanted and why she was asking for her back at that moment. He was puzzled and did not know what to do. He didn't know how to explain his feelings because he was at a loss himself. He couldn't understand what exactly prompted her to ask about this right now. After a few minutes of explanation and storytelling, Mr. Jorge finally understood what was being discussed. He realized that there was another meaning hidden in the request. Walking down the corridor, the lady asked if Mr. Jorge thought that they might do something bad, but in fact, he thought of something completely different. He kept wondering why she didn't want to return the brooch. This question haunted him because he felt that there was something more hidden. Jorge seemed certain that Adriana had only just realized the brooch's true value. But if he doubted her intentions, then he didn't think she belonged in this house. But unexpectedly for himself, he answered something that she did not expect at all. He said that she kept the brooch very carefully, and this shocked her. Her face expressed obvious confusion, and then, Jorge noticing this, asked if she had forgotten what had happened in the Baron's house. His question took her by surprise. It was then that she realized that she wanted the brooch back, making desperate attempts to get it back. Her intentions became clear. He asked what had changed since then, because he thought the girl would immediately ask for the brooch back. What she heard shocked her, because she could not understand how she could forget about it. She began to wonder why she hadn't really noticed the brooch and why she had forgotten about it. It wasn't like her, and the question tormented her. Her explanation might have seemed ridiculous, but she decided to be frank. She admitted that she had simply forgotten about it, despite all the significance of the thing. He also said that despite her ignorance and indifference, he could not understand how one could forget such a treasure as the imperial family brooch, which is of great value. She replied that too many things had happened and that it had changed her perception. But for Jorge, that was not a sufficient answer. He still could not understand how it had happened. However, she herself could not understand how it happened, that she had forgotten about this brooch, which she had always taken such good care of. It was completely absurd, especially after everything that had happened to her. After thinking for a moment, Jorge noticed that the girl seemed ready to give him an answer. He sensed that she was about to explain why forgetting the brooch was so significant. She admitted that she really treasured this brooch because it was the one Mikhail had given her. Every time she was having a hard time, she would pick it up, remembering the day she met him. During the most difficult moments of her life, Adriana could not find anyone to support her. Only Mikhail remained close, ready to help in any situation. She always had this decoration with her, and it seemed that she felt its presence. But Mr. Jorge was sure that she did not need it now. The memory of the brooch came to her mind only after the mention of His Highness Adriana confirmed that this was indeed the case, and decided to accept the gift. After this heartfelt conversation, the knight finally gave the brooch. He asked the girl to wear it to the ball, believing that she deserved this attention. The girl silently watched this decoration, thinking Mr. Jorge replied that she could not always remain in the shadows because this brooch symbolized her status. He added that she should be proud of this decoration because it would be proof of her status, even if she did not yet feel her importance. Suddenly, Adriana understood. From the day she met Mikhail until her last day in the house, this brooch was her only companion in difficult moments. Despite all the pity that might come from her appearance, she would be forced to force those around her to treat her as part of the imperial family. No matter how low her status, everyone around her, including the highest nobility, will bow down before her, recognizing her importance, despite her origin. She thanked Mr. Jorge for returning the brooch to her, but despite her gratitude, she still had no intention of wearing it to the ball. The piece was too significant. Jorge, trying to understand her decision, asked why she wasn't going to wear the brooch. His voice was soft, but there was genuine concern in his question. She replied that she did not want to remain near His Highness for the rest of her life. Her words were full of determination, and there was a slight anxiety about the future in them. She believed that if she accepted the gift, she would be obliged to accompany him at all times. However, Jorge assured her that this was not the case. He added that she could terminate the contract at any time. But she asked him to stop joking, because she said even if she quit her job, it wouldn't matter so much. In light of everything that was going on, the situation seemed no less confusing. She added to His Highness that if she appeared with this brooch at any social event, the contract would immediately become invalid. Everything could change in an instant. For her, it was more than just a piece of jewelry. The brooch was a gift from Mikhail, but its meaning was much deeper. It was a symbol of belonging to a great family, and she felt the weight of responsibility. The brooch had long been the crown prince's distinctive mark. She wasn't sure she could bear such a weight, such a responsibility, and was ready to give it up. She added that it would be better to remain unknown than to be linked to him forever. This was her personal position, and she was not afraid to express her thoughts openly. Jorge bowed his head, taking her words in with respect. He understood what she was saying, and to her surprise, agreed with her. He seemed a little upset, which probably made him want to retreat into the shadows, to hide from view and calm down. It was understandable in such a situation. The main character could no longer concentrate on what was happening. Her thoughts were confused, and the only thing she wanted was to go to bed as soon as possible and forget. According to Ashley, after the title was passed on to Mikhail, the imperial ball was held only 6 times, and it became an integral part of life in their circle. However, although His Highness could not attend these events, his age was not a valid excuse, although it did not matter much at the moment. The reason was that Mikhail had not received an invitation, which surprised the main character. She was tormented by unpleasant premonitions, but she could not understand why this happened. Ashley tried to calm her down, assuring her that there was no need to worry, but doubts still remained. The fear of a possible mistake overcame her, and the maid shared a secret. The maid said that perhaps those who will be at the ball do not realize how important a figure Adriana is. This discovery was unexpected for the main character. Ashley advised her to just put herself out there a little bit, and then everyone around her would probably be amazed. Adriana wondered how important such a step might be for her. The main character asked what this whole secret was, to which the maid replied that it was much deeper than it might seem at first glance. Adriana felt happy to hear such advice. She was sincerely grateful for meeting such a good assistant. This meeting seemed successful and timely. Since this was her unofficial debut, Adriana could afford to keep it low-key. Quiet modesty would be her signature style that day. This is exactly what Adriana planned to do. She chose this approach so as not to attract attention to herself. Everything had to be delicate and in moderation. This was the perfect option for her. In this form, she could look quite decent, but not attract too many unnecessary glances along the way. She was glad to hear such words. Adriana asked the girl to be confident in herself, reminding her that she herself was an example of an ideal mistress. Today was one of those days when Adriana didn't have to wait outside Mikhail's bedroom. She decided not to waste time and quietly sneak into the ballroom, having prepared herself in advance. At that moment, she decided to approach the prince. When he entered the hall, he wanted them to appear together, and Adriana could not refuse him this wish. However, she understood that she should not indulge every whim of the child. Such behavior would be too difficult for her and would interfere with her plans. Adriana was becoming increasingly worried. She just needed to blend in with the crowd, but her thoughts wouldn't let go, and she couldn't get rid of the worries that filled her mind. Suddenly, a woman approached Adriana and politely asked her name, since such a young girl could not be here without an older person watching. Her gaze was wary. The woman added that she had been watching Adriana and noticed her pacing back and forth for half an hour. She suggested that the heroine's parents might have gotten lost somewhere nearby. Adriana calmly replied that everything was fine and thanked the stranger for her concern. She tried not to create unnecessary problems or attract unnecessary attention. However, the woman spoke again, claiming that if Adriana had come here secretly, she still had time to return. This statement clearly put the girl in an awkward position. She added that the atmosphere in the house had been tense lately, and even her family could have been in danger. However, Adriana had come early to observe the mood. Adriana had no intention of going deeper into the conversation and didn't know what to say. She remained silent, hoping that the situation would calm down. However, her silence only increased the woman's suspicions, and she decided to lead her to the exit. Adriana tried to explain that she had been invited to the event, but she had to show the invitation. At that moment, she felt it was important not to embarrass herself. Only now did she realize that she didn't have that important item she needed. Without it, the situation became much more difficult, and she felt it herself. If she had a brooch, all these problems could be easily solved. With this accessory, she could safely go through even the most difficult moments. The Baron's help wouldn't help here either. Even he couldn't cross the threshold of the palace, and the situation was becoming increasingly tense as time pressed. If she mentioned the Baron here, it would immediately raise a lot of suspicions towards her. This could only complicate her situation. Suddenly, the announcement of the arrival of His Highness Michael Sonnet de Brandt was heard. This event attracted the attention of everyone around her, and she felt how everything changed. It was at that moment that the girl decided that she would not have another chance. She had to act quickly before attention was focused elsewhere. While the lady was distracted, she quietly turned around and began to move quickly in the opposite direction, hoping that no one would notice her. Madame tried to stop her shouting and asking her to come back, but she was determined, believing that it was easier to hide in the crowd than to remain in sight. She decided to disappear among people, hoping that they wouldn't find her quickly. At that moment, her only chance was anonymity. Until His Majesty appeared, everyone around began to discuss the arrival of the Crown Prince. This diverted attention from her disappearance and gave her the opportunity to slip away. Everyone present was shocked. The rumors that were going around about the boy claimed that he was completely out of his mind and looked extremely strange and terrible. This was alarming. However, one of the gentlemen replied that despite his appearance, the boy was quite stupid. He did not give up hope that he would learn something. However, no one could believe it, and only the young lady heard this conversation. She, unlike the others, did not think that the emperor could make him the crown prince. However, there was probably a reason for this, and perhaps soon these same people will start discussing Mikhail's innate talents. This could have been part of the plan. The main character waited a long time for the boy to appear, because that was when she could finally play her role. Her entire plan depended on this moment. Suddenly, she noticed that something strange was happening around her. The environment had changed, and she felt that not everything was as it should be. An hour had passed since Mikhail had arrived, and no one had called her. This made the heroine wary, because delays never boded well. His Majesty was obviously late today, which surprised the main character. She could not understand what caused such uncharacteristic behavior. Besides, it was the first time that the boy had to attend a ball. Everything was too unusual not to cause concern for all participants. The ladies began to regret inviting the prince. It became increasingly clear that it would have been better if he had refused to attend the event. Adriana and Sir Jorge knew that they had only to follow the plan that the emperor had already drawn up. They could not change anything until His Majesty arrived. Time continued to move, but everyone was absorbed in anticipation. The atmosphere in the hall became increasingly tense, and no one knew when the wait would end. Despite the fact that it was called a rampart, the orchestra sat in their places, waiting for the signal. They did not play, they were just waiting for the moment when they could begin. The hall was silent, no one dared to express dissatisfaction. Even the relatives of the Grand Duke Kyle, who had considerable influence, did not allow themselves to do so. Time passed, and the girl could not tell exactly how much had passed. Finally, a messenger arrived with instructions, and the situation began to clear up. His Majesty was unable to attend the ball due to poor health. Mr. Jorge then asked if the event should continue because of this. The envoy replied that His Majesty would consider it disrespectful if the guests continued to wait. Therefore, the rest now had to depend on the Crown Prince. From the very beginning, Adriana knew that something would go wrong. Even at the moment when the prince did not appear, she felt that something was wrong. But now it was too late. Jorge had completely agreed with what was happening, leaving everything as it was. Jorge turned to Mikhail, his words sounding decisive and confident. This was necessary to keep the situation under control, because the future depended on his actions. And now finally, the moment had come for Adriana herself to intervene. The situation had become so confusing that nothing worse could have been imagined. It became obvious to her that this was exactly what the emperor had been after: complete bewilderment and confusion. The emperor wanted to make the little prince look like a fool, to make him a laughing stock at the ball. Initially, it was planned that Mikhail himself would speak up and admit that his mind was delayed in development and his speech was not developing properly. But now everything was in Adriana's hands. She stood at a crossroads, and the entire course of events depended on her decisions. Only she could change what was happening, turning the whole outcome upside down. After Adriana intervened, she had to confirm the truth that was being built around Mikhail. The aristocrats began to whisper, noticing that no one around tried to intervene. And Ilya, without even taking a single step, remained on the sidelines. Moreover, he did not even try to talk to his closest ally, Jorge. And if he now says that only she understands the prince, it will look like an inappropriate lie, completely inappropriate for this situation. The emperor decided to make Mikhail look like a fool, and Sir Jorge look like a fraud. The plan was quite logical, as it would help to get rid of them in the palace and strengthen his power. Suddenly, the heroine realized that the target of this plan was precisely Jorge. The palace had long treated him like a fool, but he was far from what everyone thought. If Jorge is labeled as a fraud, blamed for the crown prince being an idiot, his reputation will be ruined. He will lose his job. All this confused her. Perhaps the information about the emperor's plans had already been mentioned in the book, and all this was just a temporary difficulty that needed to be overcome. He couldn't fail. He had to find a way to overcome this crisis, and he would do it. Otherwise, he would lose everything, including his credibility and his position. At that moment, the messenger informed him that His Majesty had ordered Mikhail to forget all his difficulties. Jorge looked at the young man, hoping for his answer, but he remained silent. Mikhail didn't know what to answer. He remained silent and simply waited for instructions, not daring to break the silence, including in front of his advisor. The knight informed the young man that he would have to take charge of the ball and asked if he was sure he could handle the responsibility. The boy was not prepared for such a turn of events, and his face betrayed his confusion. It was obvious that the young man was starting to worry. He was clearly nervous, did not know what to do next, and how to act. His indecisiveness was obvious, and he did not know how to get out of this situation. Mr. Jorge said that the boy would succeed. He also added that Lady Adriana would soon appear, which, in his opinion, would ease the situation and provide the necessary support for further action. The young man began to blame himself for not being able to plan everything perfectly. He was worried that the situation could now get out of control, and everything could go completely differently from the previously planned plan. At that moment, Adriana approached and addressed the knight. She was calm, despite all the tension of the situation, and this slightly encouraged those around her, although the knight himself remained uneasy. The knight was glad to see her, but his anxiety only increased. His worries grew, and it seemed to him that her presence was no longer able to change the course of events, despite the fact that he was still glad of her appearance. The knight believed that they had already fallen into a trap prepared by His Majesty. Adriana's presence, it seemed to him, could no longer have the necessary effect on what was happening. However, despite his pessimism, he did not understand why a feeling of calm appeared on his face with her appearance. At that moment, he suddenly heard a strange voice, which surprised him even more. A young man in uniform was heading towards them. His approach aroused the knight's interest, since he clearly did not expect to meet this man in such a place, and at such an important moment. It was Duke Ilya Pear. His presence caused everyone no small surprise, as his appearance here was far from expected. All this only added to the mystery of what was happening. Sir Jorge was very surprised. He had not expected the Duke to be in this place, and he was surprised that such an important person was here right now in the midst of such a tense situation. The Duke asked to be addressed less formally, since Mr. Jorge was his only uncle. He asked to be called Ilya, as he had been in the days of their more casual meetings. The knight merely twisted his mouth and said nothing in response. His face expressed displeasure or confusion, but he did not express his emotions out loud, preferring silence. Having not seen each other for a long time, the Duke greeted Jorge and anyone else who was present. His greeting was polite, but there was a certain heaviness in his voice, probably due to the upcoming turmoil. The young man could not answer. He sat silently, and it was clear that he did not feel joy from the meeting. His face was a little sad, and his mood remained depressed, perhaps because of everything that was happening. Ilya immediately approached his uncle and asked if the rumors about the boy were true, claiming that he was stupid. He was concerned about this, as the rumors could affect the boy's perception in society. However, the knight replied with a smile that all this was just an exaggeration, because His Highness was simply a little nervous before his first ball. It was his first experience, and the worries were quite natural for the young heir. Although he had been holding balls since he was 9 years old, Ilya noted that each case is unique. In this case, there are many factors, and the young prince could hardly have mastered all the nuances of such an important event right away. Ilya added that he would try to find a way to help the boy cope with the situation and overcome his fears. He was sure that with support and guidance, the prince would be able to become a worthy heir. Jorge, thinking about this, thought that maybe he had finally broken ties with the family line. But his older brother couldn't let him go so easily. Maybe this whole situation was a setup to bring him back into the family. Even though he was bitten by a snake that ended up dead, Jorge was confident that death would not come so easily. He knew that he had to fight for his place in the world and maintain his dignity despite the difficulties. No one present could have imagined that Sir Jorge, the Duke's uncle, was actually involved in such a complex and intricate affair. He remained in the shadows, but his influence was far from insignificant. His name was constantly heard in class, which created an unpleasant feeling in the girl. She was already beginning to realize that everything that was happening was connected to his attempts to return Jorge to the ducal family, and she did not like it. Even in her inexperience, the girl began to suspect that all these manipulations and events were planned solely with the aim of returning Jorge to his former position and place in the family hierarchy. Sir Jorge was faced with a difficult choice that could be the only right decision for his survival. His answer would determine not only his fate, but also the fate of those around him at that moment. By refusing the offer, he risked not only losing his reputation, but also his life. This choice was too important, and the consequences could be catastrophic for him personally. By accepting the Duke's offer, Sir Jorge would not only be putting his own life at risk, but also Adriana's, and even little Michael's. The decision he made was very difficult for everyone. However, despite all the danger, this outcome seemed much better than the death of everyone without exception. Sir Jorge understood that this was the least worst of all possible solutions. Perhaps at some point, he felt that the ducal family, no matter how hard they tried, would not be able to overcome this challenge without his help. He believed that his decision would save the situation to some extent. But suddenly, Jorge unexpectedly replied that he did not need this offer at all. This was a complete surprise, especially for the girl who did not expect such a turn of events. She realized that she couldn't persuade him, and she realized that her powers were helpless. In this case, she wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat, not knowing how to react to his decision. At this point, Jorge, with a smile on his face, knelt down, which surprised those around him even more. His actions were completely unpredictable and caused confusion among everyone nearby. Everyone present was shocked by this gesture. It was absolutely not what they expected from him. in such a tense situation. The surprise did not leave them. When Jorge unexpectedly for everyone knelt before him, no one understood what exactly he was trying to say. It could mean that he and His Majesty already knew everything, and his crime would not go without consequences. Jorge decided not to hide the truth and confess everything that was hidden. His decision to reveal all the cards could radically change the situation, putting everyone in front of a new choice. Duke Ilya was extremely puzzled by what was happening and could not understand what exactly was being discussed. He asked not to say such absurd and incomprehensible words, again, trying to return the situation to a more reasonable course. However, the knight, unwilling to back down, declared that throughout this entire time, he had been deceiving His Majesty the Emperor and manipulating the very essence of the Crown Prince, misleading everyone. He continued that everyone present had probably heard about His Highness's feeble-mindedness, but these were just rumors that the knight himself had spread, trying to create a false impression of what was happening. However, according to him, all this is just empty talk, and in fact, the essence of it is that these rumors were spread by him himself in order to hide the true picture of events. Only now did Adriana begin to realize what was really happening, and it became clear to her that she needed to intervene as quickly as possible to prevent the knight from doing something even more unpredictable, like throwing himself off the cliff. The knight emphasized that the Crown Prince was as smart as his father and also had a sharp mind. Despite all the rumors, he tried to convince the audience that the audience was wrong in their assessments. Up until this point, the knight had deliberately concealed the truth, causing the crowd to be on the verge of anger and misunderstanding. He, however, believed that all of this was justified by his personal strategy. He laughed, claiming that the situation was easier than taking candy from a baby, explaining that the Crown Prince did have a speech impediment that could affect how others perceived him. The people were perplexed and could not understand what exactly the real problem was. They did not expect that the same Sir Jorge, once a knight at court, would become involved in such a strange conflict. At this point, the emperor's advisor took the floor and turned to Sir Jorge, asking him if he wished to explain to those present that the young man, in fact, simply could not adequately perceive what was happening. She replied that this did not mean that the boy could not speak, but that his speech was so complex that only those close to him could understand it. This was alarming because no one around him knew what this young man was hiding. This statement deeply shocked Adriana. It seemed that Sir Jorge was going to revive the real idea of the ball that the emperor had destroyed. This plan was so important that the idea itself was connected to something global that could change their destinies. Jorge added that he had managed to win the favor of the Highness and use his trust. He had decided to show the possibilities that had been hidden until now, without missing the chance. He noted that he had approached the preparations for today with this attitude. However, he said that His Majesty probably already understood everything. And then everyone present became interested in what was the purpose of his actions. This surprised them because such a step toward the prince was extraordinary and caused many questions among the guests. Those present were shocked by his words, as up until this point, he had always shown impeccable loyalty to the Crown Prince. This behavior was completely at odds with the image they were accustomed to seeing in him and caused genuine bewilderment. He scratched his beard and, despite questions about the purpose of his actions, declared that the essence of this act could be understood by anyone who was not deprived of reason. This was a hint that everyone should understand what he meant. In the end, he said outright that his goal was to strip the prince of his title. This statement stunned everyone. They did not expect such a turn of events, especially from a man they trusted as a loyal ally. Adriana couldn't understand what exactly Sir Jorge was planning and how he planned to get out of this situation. It remained a mystery to her, but one thing was clear. Her life was now inevitably connected with the consequences of these intrigues. Meanwhile, the heroine Adriana was simply silent, unable to comprehend what was happening around her. Her thoughts were clouded, and she could not accept this whole situation. She watched the others feeling completely confused. The entire courtyard was in shock. People were talking among themselves, confused, asking if it was true. They couldn't believe what they were hearing and were looking for confirmation of this incredible news. Adriana couldn't believe what was happening. Everything seemed senseless and ridiculous to her because Crown Prince Mikhail was completely unsuitable for this important role. She believed that this place should belong to someone else. The title belonged to a dead man, and her mind could not accept the idea that a living man like Mikhail could hold such a position. It went against all her notions of order. Everyone around was stunned. They were surprised by how much and how suddenly everything had changed. This especially struck those who knew Mikhail because they could not imagine him as the crown prince. Suddenly, in complete silence, he unexpectedly threw down his sword, the symbol of his strength and will. This gesture was so unexpected that everyone present held their breath, trying to understand what would happen next. After this, Mikhail turned to His Excellency Duke Ilya, saying that they had already made enough noise. He asked if the Duke wanted him to go to prison himself, hinting at the possible consequences. At this time, a young man, a guy who witnessed what was happening, asked the guard to arrest Sir Jorge. But unfortunately, the miracle did not happen, and everything went according to the already predicted scenario. Adriana, full of pity and compassion for Sir Jorge, wanted to ask the others to have mercy on him, but her words fell on deaf ears, as no one paid attention to her requests. Soon, Sir Jorge was arrested after all. The guard left no choice but to carry out the order. It was inevitable, and he ended up in captivity, despite the heroine's attempts to intervene. His honor was disgraced before the eyes of countless aristocrats. The entire court watched as his dignity was humiliated, which was extremely painful and shameful for him. Although Adriana couldn't read lips, she could see his expression and know that he was trying to tell her something. Those last words were important to her, even though she couldn't quite decipher them. She began to cry because these were the words he always repeated, as it had become his habit. Such phrases often came out of his mouth, and each time they were deeply meaningful to her. These words seemed to penetrate her heart, making her experience it over and over again. Everyone was shocked by what had happened and could not understand what would happen to His Highness now. The situation had become completely unusual, and it seemed there was no simple answer to this question. The time was filled with anxiety and misunderstanding. However, Adriana was not worried about what would happen to the Highness, but about what would happen to Sir Jorge. He was an important figure for her, and the thought that his fate could be tragic did not give her any peace. At this time, the Crown Prince sat silently pondering what was happening. He did not know what to do or how to react to all these events. His silence was not just silence, but an expression of helplessness and confusion. Brother Jorge, on the other hand, was deeply distressed. He had decided to help, only to bring him back to the family, not suspecting that the consequences could be so tragic. This step seemed to be a test for him that he could not have predicted. No one could have foreseen that things would take such an unexpected turn. Everything was not going according to plan, and the situation became so complicated that even those who were close to what was happening could not understand what to do next. He was at a loss, not knowing what to do. Sir Jorge was too important to him, and he couldn't imagine living without him. It felt like a great loss, hard to recover from, no matter what was going on around him. He watched all this, realizing that new gossip had begun to appear between people. Everyone now had their own opinion, and everyone tried to interpret what had happened in their own way. All this created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust. He decided to imagine that everything that was happening was of no importance, that it was as if he did not exist in this situation. This allowed him to temporarily free himself from the feeling of heaviness and at least slightly ease his condition. Although he failed to achieve what he wanted completely, he still fulfilled the demands of the imperial family. This was his only chance to maintain his position and not end up in an unfavorable situation where he could lose everything. The emperor gave strict orders to isolate the crown prince as much as possible. His abilities were too great, and this raised concerns that his talent could lead to a threat to power. From that time on, rumors began to spread in the palace that the crown prince, contrary to all expectations, was much smarter than it might seem at first glance. These conversations forced many to reconsider their opinions of him. The emperor would never make concessions to those whose actions contradicted his plans. Therefore, no one doubted that Mr. Jorge would hardly be able to get out of this situation with benefit for himself or others. However, despite all the obstacles, the last prince, like all the others, will receive the title directly from the emperor. He is still a valuable tool, albeit not in the best position, and can be used for certain purposes. The emperor intends to announce to the entire empire that the crown prince is nothing but an idiot, and even the duke, despite his efforts, will not be able to prevent the prince's downfall. With this step, his plan to eliminate the crown prince will be almost complete. At the ball among the aristocracy, everyone saw the crown prince as just a frightened boy who was not even able to stand up for himself. The revelation that one of his confidants was a fraud only added fuel to the fire and improved the situation for the emperor. Suddenly, the messenger was called into the hall, which surprised everyone present, especially the guy. He did not expect such a turn of events, and this added intrigue to what was happening. To their surprise, the messenger turned out to be none other than Mikhail, the very same crown prince who had suddenly decided to come to the forefront and show himself, which had greatly changed the course of events in the palace. Even the prince, having gathered his courage, stepped forward and spoke. Adriana Woods believed that she could handle it because she had rehearsed all her speeches and movements for this important day many times. Adriana Woods, gathering all her resolve, stepped forward to the assembled group, decisively taking the initiative. Her confidence in her actions left no room for doubt. She was determined to continue what she had started. The girl declared that His Highness Michael had not yet finished the ball, and that no one should leave until it was over. This caused some surprise among those present, because everyone was waiting for the end of the celebration. The boy did not immediately understand what she meant. He was confused, not realizing what kind of plan she had in mind. He could not imagine that her words concealed anything more than a simple instruction. However, the girl stood her ground, confident in the correctness of her actions. Her determination and calmness gave no reason to doubt her intentions. She was in complete control of the situation. Adriana clarified that this was not some kind of trick. As the Duke might think, she referred to the recent message from the Emperor's messenger, who had conveyed the order to continue the ball. This came as a surprise to the Duke. She asked if the Duke would oppose the Emperor's order, which was conveyed by messenger. This question confused him, because he did not expect the girl to stand her ground so resolutely. Sir Jorge, who was watching the proceedings, immediately noticed that such an outcome could greatly frighten the Duke. He warned that if the girl began to show weakness, His Highness would be at a disadvantage. However, the guy couldn't shake the feeling that the girl was embellishing the situation too much. In response to her words, he uttered several dissatisfied phrases, trying to defend his point of view. At the moment when the truth began to emerge, it seemed that everyone had already witnessed the unraveling of this secret case. As expected, the being called Mikhail turned out to be feeble-minded, but Adriana did not allow him to continue. She confidently declared that the question was meaningless and that its very essence was dissolving, like a sound melting into the air. For her, such a discussion was of no interest, and she did not intend to go into details. The young man turned around and, with obvious bewilderment, addressed Adriana with a question about her true identity. He could not understand why she allowed herself to humiliate the Duke of Perot, causing him misunderstanding and discontent. It seemed to him that the lady had completely lost her fear and no longer felt threatened. However, Adriana, not wanting to stop there, continued to speak with restraint but confidence, not paying attention to his confusion. Gathering her strength and strengthening her resolve, she added that, as Sir Jorge had said, she was one of the few who could understand the true meaning of His Highness's words, and her words were filled with confidence and determination. At that moment, the same lady who had recently tried to throw Adriana out of the ball appeared. She admitted that she had no parents and could not say exactly what family she came from. But her appearance changed the course of events. She had immediately decided that the girl had somehow secretly entered the ball, but now it seemed to her that she looked more like the personal servant of the Crown Prince, which in turn greatly puzzled her. She could not understand why, being an aristocrat, the girl decided to appear at the ball, behaving so insolently, as if she was completely unaware of her status. The Duke thought that she was too young to be a servant. The other girls discussed her among themselves, noting that she looked no older than a child, and most likely had no official title or position, which further increased her uncertainty. Suddenly, the conversation stopped when the Crown Prince walked up to the girl and touched her. This moment left everyone speechless, as his action was unexpected and extremely strange to everyone present. The entire hall froze as the Crown Prince began to do something that caught the attention of everyone gathered. The atmosphere in the air became tense, and the moment itself seemed decisive for what would happen next. Showing intimacy in such a situation could hardly help improve her situation. But the Crown Prince still took this step, despite all the risks and consequences that could follow. He repeated the vague word again, which sounded like foam. It was obvious that the boy was shaking violently, and his condition seemed to be becoming more and more tense, causing those around him to worry. The girl realized that she needed to focus on her role, because only she could help Mikhail. She decided that she had to be ready for any turn of events and support him, no matter how difficult it was. She added that His Highness felt that her words were not worth listening to, although in fact she knew that her support could be decisive for everything that was happening, even if her opinion was not taken seriously. The woman did not react well to the boy's words, and then the boy said the word stone. Hearing this, the noblewoman began to doubt what he meant and spoke up, asking questions about his words. Suddenly, the young man uttered the word ball. This word had several meanings, and in this context, he most likely meant to refer to Sir Jorge, which could confuse everyone nearby. If we were to start talking about him now, it would certainly not lead to good results. The young man was on the verge of expressing something important, and any misinterpretation could lead to misunderstandings among those present. But the young man repeated the word sword again, leaving the girl completely confused. She did not know how to react because such words can have very serious consequences if they are misinterpreted. She felt uneasy because even if she tried to decipher his words incorrectly, it could cause confusion. She realized that no one present would probably understand the true meaning of his words. At that moment, the thought occurred to her that it wouldn't be a big deal if she committed a little deception. She reasoned that her actions only concerned Mikhail, and it wouldn't hurt anyone if she did what she thought was right. But for a moment, the girl stopped, realizing that if she brought up the subject here, the consequences could be dire. She realized that any wrong word or action could lead to serious consequences. In the end, she decided that she wouldn't do that because she was the only one who could help Mikhail communicate with other people. By changing the meaning of his words, she could betray him, which would be unacceptable. Veronica Ilia felt like everything in her life could fall apart. If even the only person she communicated with betrayed her, she might never be able to trust anyone again. This realization weighed heavily on her soul. By then, she would have left him and left alone. There would be no one he could confide in. Only Sir Jorge remained the one who followed him sincerely and did not betray him. Realizing this, she decided to reveal the truth and said that His Majesty had mentioned Sir Jorge, but added that what Sir Jorge had been told did not reflect the real state of affairs because this man was not who he was thought to be. She told the nobles that the knight who supported the working community always acted in the interests of others, for his loyalty and dedication. The Crown Prince expressed his deep gratitude to him, placing his example on a pedestal. At one point, the young man uttered the word "kapkan," which indicated the beginning of Ilia's actions. However, she hastened to add that Sir Jorge's arrest was unjust, and the prince hoped that he would be released immediately before it was too late. It seemed that this was the last word spoken by the young man. There was no determination or strength in his voice. This feeling of finality confused those present, making them think about their next steps and consequences. The women standing nearby began to speculate about the origins of the orphan girl that Sir Jorge had brought with him. They thought that she was just a commoner, capable of composing well, but nothing more. At least that was how they imagined her. The look at the girl left no doubt. She looked like a simpleton, dressed in expensive clothes, which contrasted sharply with her demeanor. The women spoke quietly, not believing that she could be anything more than just a chance find of Sir Jorge. They watched her with distrust, believing that her words were merely an attempt to pass them off as His Highness's speech. For them, it was nothing more than a farce, an attempt to hide the real meaning of what was happening under stupid words. Everything seemed forced and artificial. The girl quickly realized that the situation was getting worse. She knew that if she didn't take action, the consequences could be much more serious than she had imagined. Adriana felt a heavy pressure on herself, from which there was no easy way out. To set the record straight, she added firmly that the women were right in their opinion. She was indeed just a simple orphan who had been dressed in expensive clothes and was no different from the others. She admitted that she had never attended school and therefore had not had much of an upbringing. There was a bit of shame in her words because the life she had led was not at all up to high standards. She was her own teacher. She described how she would start each morning with household chores and then go to the mountains to get fresh herbs for her needs. After that, until nightfall, she would work around the house like a real housewife. For her, it was a familiar routine and nothing special. The girl tried to explain how an ordinary girl like her could embellish Crown Prince Mikkel's words. After all, if that were the case, her words could be lies, and he, being reasonable, could easily notice it. The Emperor's messenger agreed with her words, noting that Mikkel was indeed not prone to delusions. The Crown Prince had always shown firmness of mind, and in this matter he was completely uninfluenced. Soon, the aristocrats began to discuss what they had heard. Their opinion of the girl had changed, and now her words began to sound much more convincing. It seemed that she could really be a simple woman who could communicate with such a high-profile person as His Highness. The women could not understand how a child of the people could compose a speech worthy of Highness, and as if in response to their bewilderment, Duke Ilya looked at them angrily, forcing them to shut up. He bade them answer if Adriana's words were true, for if so, it meant that His Highness possessed intelligence considerable for a man of his station. However, in his opinion, this was not so at all. His look, filled with doubt, showed that he did not believe what was said. Ilya believed that all this was just empty words, and that the girl probably did not realize the seriousness of the situation. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, a familiar voice was heard. It was so clear and confident that it immediately attracted the attention of everyone present, and many turned their gaze to the source of the sound. It turned out to be the professor who had been teaching the boy. She said that she had spent the last few months studying with His Highness Kale, teaching him knowledge that now seemed quite profound. This surprised many, as the teacher was among those who attended the ball, and they did not expect to see him in such a place. The presence of this woman was unexpected, and her words made everyone freeze. It was a real surprise for the girl, who was surrounded by a crowd. She did not expect that this woman, famous and respected, would turn out to be such an important figure in the boy's education. Everyone present was shocked, because it was Tessa Schuber, a professor at the academy, a person of outstanding knowledge, whose name had always commanded respect in high circles. No one expected her to appear. Tessa Schubert reported that she had taught His Highness politics and history. And in 3 months, he had reached such a level that he was in no way inferior to a trained academy student, which came as a complete surprise to everyone. The entire society circle began to whisper, shocked that such a high-ranking person as Tessa was teaching a boy. Their bewilderment was understandable, but the surprise did not leave them even after her explanation. Surprisingly, the Crown Prince was able to catch up with the Academy's curriculum in just 3 months, which surprised everyone. Ilya, however, was not surprised by this, because he had already been informed about it in advance. He thought they were having some kind of written conversation, but the woman replied that the boy had neither speech nor the ability to write. This opened up new questions about how learning occurs. Ilya, hearing her answer, noted that in that case the woman could teach the boy anything. He paid attention to his appearance and, having made hasty conclusions, declared that the boy understood everything. The woman, hearing this, answered with restraint that, in her opinion, the Duke was very much mistaken, since apparently his ideas about the situation had changed since he had listened to academic lectures. She reminded him that the Crown Prince and Miss Woods had just demonstrated how they communicated, and this argument turned out to be no less significant and irrefutable for Ilya. The woman did not want to continue the conversation with this, in her opinion, fool. She turned around, preparing to leave, but the aristocrats began to ask questions, asking if it was true what she said. She then, without hesitation, declared that she was putting her reputation on the line. Raising her hand to her heart, she confirmed that the young girl was not a servant at all, and that everything that had been said was the truth. She emphasized that she fully believed and had no doubt that all the words conveyed to her really belonged to His Highness, thereby assuring those gathered of the truth of her words. All the women were shocked. The aristocrats were ready to hear everything, except this. It was with the help of the professor's research that the Schuber Empire significantly expanded its possessions, so there was no point in her confirming the lie. The women began to confirm these words among themselves, because she was not one of those who would easily interfere in such a situation, because she had no reason to deliberately interfere. But I still couldn't believe it. And then the professor replied that anyone could understand it if they talked to him personally for 3 months. She added that Miss Woods was a commoner and had never attended school, and although she had also attended the lessons, she could not understand even half of them. But no matter what topic she asked, His Highness, his answers always sounded insightful. Ilya even thought a little about the fact that Professor Schubert is so protective of the Crown Prince. This is surprising because the spies accurately reported that she did not even have a semblance of sympathy for him. Didn't she become the Crown Prince's teacher only because Jorge was obliged to pay off her enormous debts? Suddenly, everything fell into place in Ilya's head, as if a complex puzzle had come together. He couldn't help but laugh, loud, harsh, almost defiant. There was triumph in his eyes, as if he had just caught someone red-handed and was completely sure that he had figured out the woman. Suddenly, right in the middle of the crowd, he made a loud statement. His voice did not waver, and everyone heard how he accused Adriana of lying. He was confident in himself and in his words, not giving the slightest chance to doubt his determination to expose her. Despite the harshness of the accusation, the professor remained calm. She stood firm and confident, not giving in to emotions. Her voice sounded clear when she asked Ilya to be more careful and attentive with his words, because every word spoken could have consequences. The Duke seemed to remember something important, and squinting, asked if the woman had any debts left after the collapse of her family. Adriana answered calmly, without a hint of confusion. She said that there was no point in waiting for her to go broke, because no one could afford it. Ilya asked if the woman had any huge debts left after the collapse of her family, and then the miss replied that she was not on the verge of ruin. It was not capable of ruining her. To this, Ilya only smirked and said that Sir Jorge had gotten close to her on purpose. Allegedly, he had promised to pay off his debts, and this was the reason why Adriana took the position of the prince's teacher, the same one whom all the respected mentors had already rejected. But she answered again, calmly and confidently. Adriana emphasized that His Highness was not the fool they were trying to make him out to be. There was nothing in him that would allow him to be called that. Her voice sounded sincere and protective, like someone who saw potential in him. And yet, despite her student's defense, she agreed with some of the Duke's words. It sounded like a partial confession, and that was enough for the audience. No one needed more evidence. Everyone seemed to have found confirmation of a long-established opinion. Ilya, without losing a moment, declared this out loud. He reminded everyone that a month ago, Schubert herself had revealed the whole truth. Allegedly because of the debts that Sir Jorge had paid. Adriana continued to lie. His words sounded like a final blow full of venom and confidence. It seemed that the entire aristocracy was once again in a state of confusion and mild bewilderment. The unexpected turn of events had upset the usual order, upsetting the delicate balance between their pride and their desire to understand everything. Duke Ilya waited for the professor's answer with obvious tension, not taking his eyes off her. At that moment he seemed especially focused, as if he felt that something important was coming, and the explanation could change a lot. The woman turned to the prince, and looking at him with restraint, asked him if she had made mistakes while training him. There was confidence in her voice, but underneath it, there was a cold challenge. Then the young man spoke Elbrand's name. It was not just a word. It was a sign that he remembered his past, had not renounced it, but no longer held a grudge. His voice sounded firm and almost calm. Elbrand's name was the key to everything, the very meaning she had tried to impart to the lessons. The city had been destroyed long ago, reduced to ashes, and now remained only a lifeless symbol of what was gone. The professor confirmed what was said. A slight regret flashed in her eyes. After all, Elbrand had once been a significant place, but now its essence had disappeared, and with it, its former influence. Then she asked a seemingly simple question. How could a child of commoners know about a place that had disappeared 7 centuries ago? The answer was obvious. It was the will of the Crown Prince himself. She then noted, without undue emotion, that the accusations directed at her were in vain. Her words sounded cold-blooded, but at the same time they carried a stab of self-esteem. Suddenly, the woman asked if the Duke knew how the debt that Sir Jorge had agreed to pay had come about. Her tone was almost calm, but there was something deeper behind it than simple interest. Duke Ilya froze. His gaze froze, and his face lost all expression. Suddenly, his confidence disappeared, and it became clear that what was said had touched something very personal and painful. He didn't say a word. Panic was clearly visible on his face. He seemed to be struggling with an internal storm, not knowing how to confront it or what to say to keep things from getting worse. It was clear from his appearance that he knew the truth and the essence of what had happened. But the professor asked a new question. Why did the young man dare to present everything in such a way, as if there was something more behind him than just knowledge?